Thrown out at 19, the homeless Navy SEAL bought a $15 rusted hangar. Then his K-9 found what powerful men had buried. 15 years after a locked door taught Daniel Hayes he could be thrown away. War had taken nearly everything else. With nowhere left to sleep but a failing pickup, the former Navy SEAL spent $15 on a condemned hangar beneath Montana's Bitterroot Mountains. Everyone saw worthless rust. But that first night, Maverick froze over a concrete floor and refused Daniel's command to move. Before we go inside, comment 1 if you believe Maverick found that hangar for a reason, or 0 if you think it was pure luck, and tell us where you're watching from. The first thing Daniel Hayes noticed was the brass. It was too clean. At 19 years old, standing in the blue darkness before sunrise with snow beginning to collect on his shoulders, Daniel stared at the side door of the farmhouse where he had lived since childhood. The old lock had been scratched, dull, and loose enough that you had to lift the handle before turning the key. This one shone beneath the porch light. Daniel pushed his key in. It stopped halfway. He tried again. Then the front door. Then the door beside the garage. 3 doors. 3 new locks. For several seconds, Daniel simply stood there. Behind him, the fields outside Silver Creek disappeared beneath the first serious snow of the Montana winter. The Bitterroot Mountains were only black shapes against a gray horizon. His old pickup sat at the end of the gravel drive, engine ticking after a night spent sleeping behind the wheel. A light came on inside the kitchen. Daniel saw movement behind the curtain. He knocked. Gregory Nolan appeared first. Daniel's stepfather opened the wooden door, but left the glass storm door locked between them. "You already know why," Gregory said. Daniel looked past him. "No, I don't. $1,800. Daniel understood then. Gregory's construction company had been struggling for months. Bills arrived with red lettering. Suppliers called after dinner. Twice already, Gregory had accused Daniel of taking small amounts from the office cash box. Both times, the money had later turned up in Gregory's own records. "I didn't take it. You were in the office Thursday. I work there. Exactly." Daniel kept his voice low. He had learned years earlier that getting angry with Gregory only gave the man another weapon. "Check the deposits. Check the receipts. Count everything again." "I did." "Then count it one more time." Gregory's jaw tightened. "You're done here." A shadow moved behind him. Daniel saw his mother. Susan Hayes stood near the kitchen entrance, wearing a gray robe, both hands wrapped around a coffee mug. Her hair was uncombed. Her face looked frightened. Daniel stopped looking at Gregory. "Mom?" Susan's eyes met his. That was all he needed. She knew. Maybe she did not know where the money had gone, but Daniel could see that she did not believe he had taken it. "Tell him," Daniel said. Susan's fingers tightened around the mug. Gregory glanced over his shoulder. "Go back inside." She didn't move. Daniel stepped closer to the glass. "Mom." Her lips parted. Nothing came out. Gregory reached down and lifted a green duffel bag Daniel recognized from the hall closet. He opened the storm door just far enough to put it outside. "Your mother packed some things." The door closed again. Daniel looked at the bag. "Some things? You're 19. Time you stopped being somebody else's problem." Daniel almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, because he had turned 19 yesterday and had forgotten his own birthday. He looked at Susan one last time. She was crying now, silently, still holding the coffee, still standing behind the glass. Daniel waited for her to move. One step would have been enough, a hand on the lock, a word, anything. She lowered her eyes. Daniel picked up the duffel. He walked back toward his truck without arguing. Halfway down the drive, he heard the deadbolt turn behind him. That sound stayed with him longer than Gregory's accusation ever would. 15 years later, Daniel woke reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. His hand struck the dashboard instead. He came upright so violently that his shoulder hit the driver's side window. Darkness, cold glass, snow. For one disorienting second, Daniel saw neither Montana nor the parking lot around him. He saw dust hanging in white light, a broken wall, Aaron Cole disappearing behind smoke. Then 70 pounds of Belgian Malinois climbed across the center console and pressed hard against Daniel's chest. Maverick. The dog did not move. Daniel's breathing came too fast. He closed his eyes. Easy, Maverick pressed harder. Daniel put one hand against the dog's ribs. Warm, solid, present. Truck, Daniel whispered. Montana, Silver Creek. Maverick watched him. You're here. The dog's ears shifted. I'm here. Only then did Maverick ease back. Daniel checked the dashboard clock. 17 a.m. He had slept 23 minutes. That was almost good. He leaned his head against the seat and looked through the windshield. He had parked behind a closed farm supply store because the lot gave him 3 clear exits, and nobody could approach from the rear without crossing an open patch beneath a security light. He knew how ridiculous that sounded. He also knew he would not have slept at all anywhere else. Snow covered the hood of his 12-year-old Ford. The heater worked when it felt like it. The transmission slipped between second and third. Behind the seats were everything Daniel Hayes still owned. 2 duffel bags, a plastic box of military paperwork, 3 shirts, work boots, Maverick's food, a framed photograph Daniel kept face down, and the old field watch that had belonged to Daniel's biological father. Daniel turned his wrist. The watch still ran. He had left that farmhouse at 19 with $67 and that watch. Then came the Navy, buds, the teams. Years when every hour had a purpose, and every man beside him knew exactly what was expected. Daniel had become very good at going places other people were trying desperately to escape. Then Aaron Cole died. After that, Daniel discovered surviving something and returning from it were not the same skill. He eventually left the Navy. The savings went slowly. Then quickly, a job at a private security company lasted 4 months. A warehouse job lasted 6 weeks after a steel pallet hit the floor behind him, and Daniel found himself crouched against a wall before he understood where he was. He stopped answering friends, stopped returning calls, stopped telling people he was fine because eventually even that felt like too much conversation. The apartment went 3 weeks earlier. Now there was the truck and Maverick. Daniel looked at the dog. You know what the good news is? Maverick stared back. We're not late for anything. His tail struck the seat once. Daniel smiled despite himself. It disappeared quickly. By 7, they were outside a diner along Highway 93. Warm yellow light filled the windows. Beyond the highway, snow-covered fields ran toward the dark wall of the Bitterroots. Daniel waited until he could see which booths were empty. He chose one against the wall facing the entrance. Maverick settled beneath the table. The waitress poured coffee. A metal tray crashed in the kitchen. Daniel's entire body locked. For half a heartbeat, the diner vanished. Then Maverick's nose touched his knee. Daniel looked down. Brown eyes. Calm. No smoke. No Aaron. Just coffee, snow, and an old country song playing quietly somewhere behind the counter. Daniel exhaled. Thanks, brother. He drank his coffee slowly, because buying another cup would mean spending money he needed for gas. That was when he noticed the yellow paper taped inside the front window. County Surplus Auction, Saturday, Vehicles, equipment, condemned structures, all property sold as is. Daniel almost looked away. Then one listing caught him. Falcon Ridge Airfield, Hangar 3, no reserve, contents included. Daniel read it twice. He knew Falcon Ridge. Everybody around Silver Creek did. The old emergency airstrip sat beyond the wheat farms near the base of the mountains. It had been abandoned for years. Daniel remembered seeing the runway as a teenager, cracked concrete disappearing toward pine-covered ridges. A condemned hangar was not a home, but it had a roof, maybe 4 walls, maybe somewhere Maverick would not have to sleep curled against a truck door while the temperature dropped below 0. Daniel reached for his wallet. He counted what remained. Not much. Maverick lifted his head. Daniel looked from the money to the auction notice. 15 years earlier, someone had decided Daniel Hayes was old enough to survive outside a locked door. He had spent most of his adult life proving them right. Now, with snow falling harder beyond the diner window and his dog watching him from beneath the table, Daniel wondered for the first time whether surviving was the same thing as having somewhere to belong. He tore the auction address from one of the paper tabs. Then he folded it carefully and put it beside his father's watch. "Come on, Maverick." The dog stood immediately. Daniel left $1 beneath the coffee mug and stepped back into the Montana cold. Neither of them knew it yet, but at the far end of a dead runway, beneath a rusted roof, something had been waiting in the dark for more than 20 years, and Maverick would be the first to realize it was there. The county surplus auction started at 9 on Saturday morning behind a maintenance yard outside Silver Creek. By 8:45, the gravel lot was already crowded with ranch pickups, utility trailers, and men in insulated coveralls stamping snow from their boots. A diesel generator rattled beside the registration table. Somewhere near the back, an auctioneer tested a microphone that squealed hard enough to make Daniel's shoulders tighten. Maverick felt it. The dog turned his head toward Daniel before the sound had even faded. "I'm good," Daniel said quietly. He wasn't, but the parking lot was open, the exits were visible, and nobody was behind him. That was enough. Daniel signed his name at the folding table and accepted a bidder number clipped to a thin wooden paddle. The woman handling registration was in her early 60s, with silver hair tucked beneath a wool hat and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. "Martha Ellis," she said when Daniel thanked her. "You buying or just staying warm?" Daniel looked at the rows of equipment. "Depends how low people are willing to go," Martha smiled. "Then you picked the right county." The auction moved quickly. A rusted snowplow brought $700. An old utility trailer went for $900. 3 portable generators crossed $1,200 before Daniel stopped pretending he might have a chance at one. He stood near the back, with Maverick seated against his leg, and watched men spend in minutes what Daniel had learned to stretch across months. Each winning bid made the money in his own wallet feel smaller. He had enough for fuel, dog food, a few days of cheap meals if he was careful. Not enough for a trailer, not enough for a room, not enough for anything anybody else seemed to call shelter. Then the auctioneer flipped a page on his clipboard. "All right, folks, lot 31. His voice changed, not dramatically, just enough that the crowd seemed to understand before he finished reading. "Falcon Ridge Airfield, Hangar 3, lease interest only, condemned structure, utilities disconnected, roof failure along the west side, contents transfer as is, county clearance scheduled 75 days from date of sale." A few people laughed. The auctioneer looked toward the front row. "Who'll give me 500? Nobody raised a hand. 200? Silence. 100? A man in a Carhartt jacket called out, "You paying us to haul it off?" That earned a larger laugh. Daniel looked down at Maverick, The dog's ears were forward. The auctioneer sighed. $50. Somebody give me 50 and go own yourself a piece of aviation history. Still nothing. Daniel thought of the snow pressing against the truck windows at 4 in the morning. He thought of Maverick curled against the passenger door because that side leaked less cold. He thought of the yellow auction notice, a roof, 4 walls, maybe. His paddle rose before he had completely decided. 15. The laughter stopped long enough for heads to turn. Daniel immediately wished they hadn't. The auctioneer squinted toward him. $15? Yes, sir. A contractor near the front looked Daniel over. Then at Maverick. Then at the worn coat Daniel had slept in 2 nights earlier. Boy, you buying a Hangar or a tetanus shot? A few people laughed again. Daniel said nothing. The auctioneer lifted one hand. I've got 15. Anybody give me 20? Nobody did. 15 once. Daniel could hear the generator. Twice, he felt every eye in the lot. Sold. The wooden gavel cracked against the side of the podium. $15 to bidder 74. Maverick looked up at Daniel as if something important had just happened. Daniel stared at the paddle in his hand. Apparently we own a Hangar. Martha found him after the auction. She took his payment, handed him a carbon copy receipt, a ring with 2 old keys, and a packet of county paperwork thick enough to make $15 feel like a clerical error. Read all of this, she said. I will. I mean it. Daniel looked at her. Martha lowered her voice. Falcon Ridge isn't abandoned because people forgot where it was. That got his attention. What does that mean? It means the county has wanted it cleared for years. She pointed to one line near the bottom of the lease transfer. 75 days. After that, they're scheduled to demolish the remaining structures. Daniel nodded. That part he had heard. Martha hesitated. Then she added, There's an old water line behind the north wall. Last I knew, the hand valve still worked if it hasn't frozen solid. Daniel looked at her. She pretended to reorganize her papers. You telling everybody who buys condemned property where the water is? No. Then why me? Martha glanced toward Maverick, then toward Daniel's duffel in the truck. Because Montana gets cold at night. That was all she said. The road to Falcon Ridge left the highway 6 miles north of Silver Creek and narrowed between open ranch land and frozen irrigation ditches. Snow had stopped by noon, leaving the sky pale and hard. The Bitterroot Mountains stood west of the valley, their upper ridges lost behind low clouds. Daniel drove slowly because the Ford's front tires were nearly bald. Maverick sat upright beside him, watching fence lines and passing cattle with the seriousness of a sentry. The turnoff appeared almost without warning. Falcon Ridge Airfield. The old sign leaned toward the ditch. Half its paint was gone. A newer county notice had been bolted beneath it. Daniel parked and got out. The notice was easy to read. Property scheduled for clearance. Lease termination. 75 days. Authorized redevelopment pending. Daniel stood there longer than he meant to. 75 days. He had bought a roof with an expiration date. Could be worse, he said. Maverick looked at him. Daniel glanced at the collapsed gate. I know. It could be raining. The old runway stretched nearly half a mile toward the foothills. Grass and weeds pushed through long cracks in the concrete. Wind dragged powder snow across it in white ribbons. To the south stood the skeleton of an abandoned grain elevator. To the north, wheat fields rolled toward dark lodgepole pine. At the far end of the runway sat Hangar 3. Daniel stopped the truck. For $15, he had somehow still overpaid. The structure was enormous and exhausted, Corrugated steel walls had gone red-brown with rust. Several roof panels were missing. One side sagged where an old support had buckled. The main aircraft doors looked welded shut by years of weather. Maverick jumped down first. Daniel followed. The silence around Falcon Ridge was different from the quiet of town. It was too complete. No traffic, no voices, only wind sliding over steel. Daniel found the side entrance beneath a bent metal awning. The first key did nothing. The second turned after 3 tries. The door opened with a shriek that echoed through the building. Maverick froze. Daniel's hand moved instinctively toward a weapon he no longer carried. Then he caught himself. Clear. Maverick entered. Daniel waited 1 second, listening. Nothing. He followed. The hangar swallowed daylight. Snowlight filtered through roof seams in narrow silver beams, turning suspended dust into drifting smoke. Broken metal shelving lined one wall. There were aircraft tires stacked in a corner, split and flattened with age. An engine stand lay on its side. A cracked workbench sat beneath faded safety posters. Daniel saw sections of aluminum skin, lengths of hose, boxes of corroded bolts, and part of what looked like an old aircraft cowling buried beneath canvas, but no airplane, no hidden treasure, no miracle, just junk. Daniel let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Well, Maverick walked deeper inside. Home sweet home. The north wall was partly blocked by shelving, but Martha had been right. Behind it, Daniel found an old iron spigot emerging from the wall. The valve resisted. He wrapped his glove around it and pulled harder. Nothing. He tried again. A groan came through the pipe, then a thin stream of rusty water sputtered into the drain. Daniel laughed. Actually laughed. Maverick came over to inspect it. Look at that. Daniel cupped a little water and smelled it. Metal, cold, probably terrible. He let it run. We have plumbing. That afternoon he worked until his hands went numb. He cleared broken glass from a corner farthest from the damaged roof. He dragged 2 sheets of plywood against the wall to block drafts. He swept decades of dirt into piles. Maverick followed him for the first hour, then eventually settled near the sleeping bag Daniel unrolled beside an old storage cabinet. As evening came, the temperature dropped fast. Daniel hung his battery lantern from a nail. Its weak yellow circle reached only part of the hangar. Beyond, darkness swallowed the ceiling. For dinner, Daniel ate crackers and canned chili warmed over a small camping stove. Maverick got the last of his dry food. Daniel made a note to buy more tomorrow. You're eating better than I am. Maverick did not appear ashamed. Daniel leaned back against the wall. For the first time in weeks, wind wasn't pushing directly through a truck door. The place smelled like rust, cold oil, and old wood. It was ugly, temporary, condemned. Daniel looked around anyway. 4 walls, a roof mostly, running water if you didn't mind the color. He had lived in worse places overseas. Some of them had people shooting at him. Maybe 15 wasn't stupid. Maverick lifted one ear. Daniel looked toward the darkness beyond the lantern. No comment? The dog put his head down. Daniel checked the door twice before sleeping. Then a third time. He hated that he did it. He did it anyway. He positioned the sleeping bag where he could see the entrance. Maverick circled once and lay between Daniel and the door. Outside, wind came down from the bitterroots and rattled the loose roof panels. Daniel closed his eyes. He woke once at 11:06, again at 11:42. Again after midnight when metal somewhere in the building snapped as it cooled. Each time Maverick was there. Then sometime after 2, Daniel opened his eyes and knew immediately something was wrong. Not danger, absence. The space beside him was empty. Maverick. No response. Daniel sat up. The lantern was almost dead. Its yellow light barely reached across the concrete. Mav. Still nothing. Daniel got to his feet and pulled on his boots. He found the dog 30 yards away near the center of the hangar. Maverick stood over a long steel maintenance trench set flush into the floor. Body rigid, tail level, his nose pointed down. Daniel approached slowly. "What is it?" Maverick did not look at him. Daniel saw nothing except old steel plates and black grease packed into their seams. "Come." The command was automatic. Maverick had heard it thousands of times. He did not move. Daniel frowned. "Maverick, here." One ear twitched. The dog stayed exactly where he was. That changed Daniel's breathing. Maverick had obeyed him in helicopters, gunfire, dust storms, and chaos that had left grown men unable to hear themselves think. He did not ignore commands, not without a reason. Daniel stepped closer. Maverick lowered his head toward the concrete. A low growl rolled through his chest. Daniel crouched beside him. The steel beneath Maverick's paws looked solid. Old, dead. Daniel placed one hand against the floor. For a second, nothing happened. Then he felt it. A faint thread of cold air moving upward through a seam where no air should have been moving at all. Daniel slowly turned his head toward Maverick. The dog stared back once, then looked down again. Something was under the hangar. Daniel kept his palm against the concrete. The air was unmistakable. A thin, cold current slipped through the black seam beneath his fingers, steady enough to move the fine dust gathered there. He lifted the dying lantern. The maintenance trench was roughly 4 feet wide and 12 feet long, covered by steel plates that looked as old as the hangar itself. 50 years of grease had hardened along their edges until metal and concrete appeared fused together. Maverick lowered his nose. Back. The dog moved 2 steps this time. Daniel studied the floor. At first he saw nothing unusual, then his training took over. Don't look for what belongs, look for what doesn't. One corner of the steel plate sat slightly lower than the others. Daniel scraped at the grease with his father's old field knife. Black flakes broke away. Underneath was a circular depression. A bolt. He cleared another corner, a second bolt, then 2 more. 4 recessed fasteners had been deliberately buried beneath layers of grease and dirt. "Well, Mav." The Malinois watched him. Somebody didn't want this opened. Daniel found a breaker bar among the abandoned tools. The first bolt resisted so hard he thought the head might shear off. Then it moved. The sound cracked through the empty hangar. Daniel froze. For half a second it became another metallic sound in another place. Aaron shouting. A flash. Concrete dust. Daniel's hand locked around the breaker bar. Maverick touched his shoulder with his nose. Daniel closed his eyes. "Montana," he breathed. "Hangar." Another breath. "Maverick." The dog's tail tapped the floor. Daniel opened his eyes. "Let's finish." The last bolt came free shortly before sunrise. Daniel wedged the breaker bar beneath the plate and lifted. It was heavier than he expected. Maverick backed away as a dark rectangle opened beneath them, not a maintenance pit. Stairs, concrete steps descended into blackness. Daniel stared. The hangar suddenly felt much larger than it had 5 minutes earlier. He retrieved the lantern and checked its battery. Almost dead. His phone had 41%. Enough. Maverick, heel. They descended together. 8 steps, then 12. At the bottom stood a steel door painted government green. No lock. Daniel pushed it. The hinges moved silently. Cold air rolled over him, carrying smells the hangar above did not have. Canvas, dust, old paper, machine oil, something medicinal. Daniel swept his phone light across the room and stopped. Falcon Ridge had been hiding an entire world beneath his feet. The underground space stretched beyond the reach of the phone light. Metal shelves stood against concrete walls. Coils of rescue rope hung from hooks. Orange emergency packs sat beneath faded labels. There were oxygen bottles, medical cases, snowshoes, climbing harnesses, flare boxes, folded stretchers, and an old radio console crowded with switches and analog gauges. A huge topographic map covered one wall. Red pencil circles marked mountain passes throughout the Bitterroot range. Dates were written beside them. Names, hundreds of names. Daniel moved closer. Some had single lines beneath them. Others had short notes, broken femur, Lost Horse Creek, hypothermia, Granite Pass, child, found 0217, pilot down, North Ridge. Every entry carried a date. The oldest Daniel could see went back decades. What was this place? Maverick moved ahead. Daniel followed him into a second section separated by a glass partition. An emblem remained painted on the wall, faded but readable. Falcon Ridge Volunteer Air Rescue. Below it was the outline of wings surrounding a mountain peak. Daniel stared at those words. He had grown up 11 miles away. He had never heard the name, not once. A rescue headquarters did not simply disappear, not one this large. He crossed to the radio desk. A coffee mug sat beside an old microphone, a brown ring still staining the bottom. A clipboard hung from a nail. Its paper had yellowed almost to tan, and Daniel lifted it carefully. Flight readiness, fuel, medical, weather, crew, kind. Daniel stopped. Maverick's ears came forward. IK-9. The dog moved past him. His nails clicked softly across the concrete, then stopped. Daniel turned. Maverick sat beneath a framed photograph. The glass was coated in dust. Daniel wiped it with his sleeve. A small red aircraft stood on a snowy strip beneath a mountain sky. Beside it was a gray-haired man in a heavy flight jacket, perhaps 60, perhaps older. His face was lean and weathered, but his smile was enormous. At his side sat a German shepherd. The dog wore a rescue harness. One hand rested between its ears. Daniel looked down at Maverick. For a strange second, the distance between the photograph and the dog beside him seemed very small. He wiped the brass plaque beneath the frame. Benjamin Cross and Shadow Falcon Ridge, Rescue 1999 Benjamin Cross. The name meant nothing to Daniel. Maverick continued staring at the photograph. Shadow. That got the Malinois' attention. Daniel almost smiled. Don't get sentimental. Maverick looked at him as if Daniel were the one behaving strangely. Morning light began finding its way down the stairwell. Daniel switched off his phone and stood in the gray underground room. As the darkness softened, more details emerged. Photographs, dozens. Benjamin Cross beside wrecked cars, Cross carrying a child toward an ambulance, Shadow standing in snow nearly to his chest, a helicopter on a mountain road. Volunteer crews drinking coffee beside the red aircraft. There were newspaper clippings, too. Mountain Rescue saves 3 local pilot flies through storm. Falcon Ridge volunteers search through night. Daniel moved slowly along the wall. A community had existed here. People had trusted this place when something went wrong. And then, somehow, it had vanished so completely that the county could sell the building above it for $15. Daniel's military instincts disliked that kind of absence. Organizations left records. People told stories. Heroes got plaques. Failures got rumors. Falcon Ridge had apparently received neither. He returned to the map. One area had been circled repeatedly in red. Black Horn. Several dates clustered around it. The most recent entry was 22 years old. Daniel leaned closer. Most of the writing had faded. One line remained darker. Black Horn, weather closed. Below it, in different handwriting, cross went anyway. Daniel felt something cold that had nothing to do with the underground air. Behind him, Maverick growled. Daniel turned fast. The dog wasn't looking toward the stairs. He was looking at the photograph again. No, not at the photograph, behind it. Maverick rose and pushed his nose against the lower corner of the frame. Daniel crossed the room. "What?" The dog scratched once against the wall. Daniel removed the photograph. A small envelope had been taped behind it. The adhesive had dried so completely that the envelope came away with almost no resistance. There was no address, no stamp, only a sentence written across the front in black ink. Daniel read it once, then again. If they ever reopen this room, somebody finally came back. The words landed harder than they should have. Daniel stood with the envelope in his hand, while pale daylight spilled down the stairs behind him. Somebody finally came back. He thought of the farmhouse, his mother behind glass, the bolt turning. 15 years of never returning, because returning required believing someone wanted you there. Maverick leaned against his leg. Daniel looked down. "We're not making this about me." The dog remained against him. Daniel turned the envelope over. It had been sealed. He slid one finger beneath the flap. Before he could open it, an engine sounded above them. Daniel went completely still. Vehicle close, coming down the runway. Maverick heard it too. His body changed instantly. The quiet dog vanished. The retired military working dog returned. Ears forward, weight balanced, eyes on the stairwell. Daniel slipped the envelope inside his jacket. He killed the phone light. Another sound came through the ceiling. A truck door shutting. Then footsteps crossed the hangar floor. Slow, unhurried. Whoever had arrived did not call Daniel's name. Daniel placed one hand lightly against Maverick's harness. The footsteps stopped directly above the hidden stairwell. Silence. Then an older man's voice came down through the opening. "Son, if you're under there, you'd better tell me you haven't started throwing anything away." Daniel waited one beat, then two. "Who's asking?" The answer came immediately. "Walter Briggs." A pause. "And if you've opened Benny Cross's room, then you and me need to have a conversation before the county finds out." Daniel looked at Maverick. The dog's attention remained fixed on the stairs. Daniel climbed up first. Walter Briggs stood 20 feet away beside an old green pickup. He was in his 70s, tall but bent slightly through the shoulders, wearing canvas coveralls beneath a heavy coat. White stubble covered his jaw. His hands were dark with grease that looked older than Daniel. Walter's eyes went to the open floor plate, then to Daniel, then Maverick. Something changed in his face when he saw the dog, not fear, recognition. "Lord," Walter whispered. Maverick walked toward him. Daniel watched carefully. The Malinois stopped within an arm's reach. Walter did not reach down. Maverick made the decision for him. He stepped closer and pushed his head beneath Walter's grease-stained hand. The old man inhaled sharply. His fingers settled between Maverick's ears. Shadow used to do that. Daniel said nothing. Walter looked toward the dark opening in the floor. "You found the operations room." Maverick did. Course he did. Walter's voice had gone rough. Daniel removed the envelope from his jacket. I found this too. Walter saw the handwriting. The color seemed to leave his face. Where? Behind a photograph of Cross and his dog. Walter stared at the envelope, but did not touch it. Daniel asked the question that had been building since he saw the map. Who was Benjamin Cross? Walter looked toward the snow-covered runway. For several seconds, the only sound was wind pushing against the rusted hangar. Finally, he said, Depends who you ask. Daniel waited. Walter's jaw tightened. You ask half this county, they'll tell you Benny Cross killed 3 kids on Black Horn. Daniel looked back toward the hidden stairs. And if I ask you? Walter's eyes returned to him. I'll tell you. That's the lie that buried him. Daniel studied the old mechanic. Walter Briggs did not look like a man given to dramatic statements. His canvas coat was patched at one elbow. Grease lived permanently in the lines of his hands. His face carried the dry, wind-cut texture of someone who had spent most of 73 Montana winters outdoors. 3 kids died, Daniel said. But Cross didn't kill them. No. Then what happened? Walter looked toward the open floor plate. Not here. 20 minutes later, they were sitting in Martha Ellis's diner. Daniel chose the booth automatically. Back wall, clear view of the entrance. Maverick settled beneath the table with his shoulder against Daniel's boot. Walter noticed. He didn't comment. Martha came over with a coffee pot. Saw Walter. Then saw Daniel's face. What did you find? Daniel looked at Walter. Walter looked at Martha. The room. Martha stopped pouring. Coffee nearly reached the rim before she caught herself. You opened it? The dog did, Walter said. Martha looked down. Maverick watched her calmly. Of course he did. She set the pot down. Daniel pulled Benjamin Cross's envelope from inside his coat, but kept it face down on the table. Tell me about Black Horn. The warmth disappeared from Martha's expression. Walter leaned back. Outside, snow moved across Highway 93 in thin white sheets. 22 years ago, he began. A wilderness club from a private school came up from Missoula. 10 teenagers, 2 instructors, early December. Martha quietly slid into the empty side of the booth. They were supposed to stay below Granite Shelf, she said. Weather changed. Weather always changes up there, Walter replied. Black Horn rose west of Silver Creek, a steep shoulder of rock above the lodgepole forest. Daniel knew it from childhood. In winter, its upper slopes collected snow in deep, wind-loaded bowls. Walter continued. Group got caught above the tree line. Storm came in faster than forecast. Radio contact was bad. County Rescue couldn't get trucks past the lower road, so Falcon Ridge launched. Benny launched. Walt looked toward the window. That red airplane you saw in the photograph could land places sensible pilots wouldn't even consider roads. How many trips? 3. Daniel remembered the writing on the map. Cross went anyway. The official report says 1, Martha said. Daniel turned to her. She nodded. That's what everybody was told. Walter's mouth hardened. First trip, Benny located them. Second trip, he brought 2 down. Then what? Dispatch ordered him away from the western face. Why? Walter looked at Daniel. That's the question that ruined him. The diner door opened. A man entered carrying snow on his shoulders. He glanced toward Walter's booth, recognized him, and immediately chose a table farther away, Daniel noticed. Walter noticed Daniel noticing. "That's what 22 years will do," Walter said. "What?" Turn a question into a verdict. The official story had been simple. Benjamin Cross ignored instructions, flew into deteriorating weather. He failed to follow the search coordinates provided by dispatch. Then an avalanche tore across Black Horn. 3 teenagers died, Cross survived, and afterward, according to the county report, he lied about where he had flown and when. The rescue unit lost county support, insurance disappeared, donations stopped, families threatened lawsuits, Falcon Ridge closed. People needed somebody, Martha said quietly. Somebody what? Somebody they could point at. Walter stared into his coffee. Benny made it easy. How? He wouldn't defend himself. Daniel frowned. Why not? I asked him that for 15 years. Walter rubbed one thumb along the handle of his mug. He'd say the dead didn't get lighter because the living found excuses. That answer bothered Daniel. He understood guilt. He understood men carrying responsibility that wasn't entirely theirs. Aaron Cole's face appeared in his mind before Daniel could stop it. A broken doorway, radio chatter, Aaron turning back. Daniel forced his attention to Walter. You said flight logs were missing. Walter nodded. Benny kept records like scripture. Fuel, weather, flight time, passenger weight. Every mechanical noise that didn't sound right. After the investigation, there were pages gone, torn out, clean. Who had access? County investigators, state aviation people, rescue board. Benny, and you? Walter nodded. Daniel let that sit. Walter met his eyes. You don't trust me. I don't know you. A faint smile touched Walter's mouth. Good answer. Martha stood. I've got something. She disappeared through the swinging kitchen door. Daniel looked at the unopened envelope. Walter noticed it again. You going to read that? Eventually. Why not now? Because I don't know who I'm reading about yet. Walter considered that, then nodded once. Martha returned, carrying a framed newspaper clipping. She set it on the table. The paper had yellowed around the edges. A younger Benjamin Cross stood beside the red aircraft, with Shadow sitting at his knee. The headline read, Black Horn Hero or Reckless Pilot. Below it was another photograph, Cross leaving the county courthouse alone. Someone had circled a sentence in faded blue ink. Pilot's account contradicts official dispatch record. Daniel read it twice. What did he claim? Walter answered immediately. That something hit the mountain before the avalanche. What? An explosion. Daniel looked up. Walter lowered his voice. Benny said he heard it on his second approach. Said he saw a flash through the snow on the western face. Blasting. That's what he thought. Martha folded her arms. There were timber crews up there that year. Walter's eyes sharpened. Not according to the county. The diner suddenly seemed quieter. Daniel looked back at the clipping. What company? Walter didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, he said, You ever hear of Whitmore Timber? Daniel searched his memory. The name was familiar from trucks on the highway, lumber yards, county sponsorship signs. Big operation. Big enough. Martha glanced toward the front windows, as though the company name itself might draw attention. Walter continued. They held contracts west of Black Horn. Roads, timber, quarry access. Benny believed somebody had been blasting where they weren't supposed to be. Did he have proof? He said he did. What happened to it? Walter looked toward the mountains, disappeared with everything else. A tray hit the tile floor behind the counter. Metal cracked against ceramic. Daniel was no longer in the diner, not completely. The sound stretched, changed, became a blast against stone. Aaron shouting through radio static. Daniel's pulse surged, his hands went cold. He knew the diner was there. He could see it. That didn't mean his body believed him. Something pressed firmly against his shin. Maverick. Daniel looked down. The dog had risen and leaned his full shoulder into Daniel's leg. Daniel curled his fingers into Maverick's harness. "Silver Creek," he whispered. Walter heard him. He looked away deliberately. That small act of privacy helped more than sympathy would have. Daniel breathed. Coffee, snow, diner, Maverick. The room settled back into place. When Daniel looked up, Walter had not moved. "Cross ever do that?" Daniel asked. "Do what? Carry something that happened 20 years ago like it was happening right now?" Walter's face softened. Every day, Daniel looked at Benjamin's photograph. Maybe that was why he had started caring, not because Cross had been a pilot, not because Falcon Ridge had been hidden, because Daniel knew what it was to live beneath a version of your own story that nobody else could see. Where did Cross die? In the hangar. Daniel looked at Walter. Downstairs? No. Small room behind the west wall. Cot, stove, desk. He lived there the last few years. Alone? Walter's jaw moved. Mostly, Shadow died before him. Something in Walter's voice made Daniel stop asking. Martha touched the edge of the clipping. After Shadow died, Benjamin hardly came into town. Daniel thought of Maverick. The dog was lying down again, one paw across Daniel's boot. What happened to Cross's family? Walter looked uncomfortable. He didn't have much left. Wife, dead years before. Children. Walter hesitated. One daughter. Rebecca. Daniel waited. She left Montana after Blackhorn. Never came back that I know of. Daniel thought about a man dying alone beneath a condemned roof while an entire county slowly forgot what he had once done for them. He thought of $15, then of the underground walls covered in names. How many people did he rescue? Walter gave a tired laugh. Nobody knows. Estimate hundreds. And the county sold his hangar for $15. Walter's eyes hardened. No, Daniel frowned. They sold you a problem for $15. He leaned forward. What you found underneath it is something different. After breakfast, Walter followed Daniel back to Falcon Ridge. They walked through the underground operations room together. The old mechanic moved slowly. He touched almost nothing. At the photograph of Cross and Shadow, he stopped. That was the winter before everything went bad. Daniel handed him the envelope. Walter read the sentence. If they ever reopen this room, somebody finally came back. The old man's eyes filled, but he blinked the tears away. Open it. Daniel slid his finger beneath the flap. Inside was a single sheet. Most of it contained a list of equipment locations and maintenance instructions. Then Daniel reached the final paragraph. The handwriting changed there, pressed harder. If this room is open again, do not trust the Blackhorn report until you have seen my original flight records. Daniel looked at Walter. Original. Walter stepped closer. Daniel continued. They were not destroyed. They were not surrendered. They are where the mountain cannot rewrite them. Below that was one final line. Shadow knew the way. Daniel read it again. Then he looked at Maverick. The Malinois was standing beside the Blackhorn map. Walter's face had gone pale. What? Daniel asked. Walter stared at the line. Shadow knew the way. You understand that? I might. Walter crossed to the map. His finger stopped over a red mark near Blackhorn's western slope. Benny took Shadow on ground searches after the investigation. Week after week. People thought grief had made him crazy, What was he looking for? Walter shook his head. He never told me. Maverick sniffed the lower edge of the map. Daniel felt the mystery widening again, not closing. Walter suddenly turned toward him. Listen to me. His voice had changed. Urgent now. If Benny hid those logs, don't call the county. Don't tell an inspector. Don't tell anybody from planning, development, forestry, nothing. Why? Walter looked up toward the hangar ceiling, as if 22 years were not enough distance from whatever had happened on Black Horn. Because the men who buried Benny's name didn't disappear when he died. Daniel waited. Walter's eyes returned to him. They're still making money from that mountain. Daniel did not ask Walter to explain right away. He had learned in the teams that when an old man finally decided to tell you something he had kept buried for 20 years, rushing him was usually the fastest way to make him stop. Walter pointed at the western side of the Blackhorn map. Whitmore Timber, the same company you mentioned at the diner, same family too. Walter traced an old logging road with one grease-darkened finger. Charles Whitmore runs most of it now. His father, Everett, ran it when Benny went up there. Daniel remembered the Whitmore name from signs around Silver Creek. Timber trucks, construction projects, a scholarship banner at the high school football field. How close were they working to the avalanche, officially? Walter gave a humorless smile. Nowhere near it. And unofficially, close enough that Benny spent the rest of his life trying to prove it. A gust rattled the hangar roof above them. Daniel folded Cross's letter and returned it to the envelope. Then we find the flight records. Walter nodded, carefully. For the next 3 days, Falcon Ridge became something Daniel had not expected. Work, not employment, something better. A mission with no paycheck and no guarantee of success. Walter returned each morning in his old green flatbed carrying tools Daniel did not have. They repaired the side door, patched the worst roof seam with salvaged sheet metal, and cleared enough debris from the hangar to make it possible to see what had been hidden beneath decades of neglect. Maverick stayed close. Sometimes he followed Daniel, sometimes Walter, but whenever they went underground, the dog became intensely focused. He sniffed the walls, the cabinets, the floor. Nothing led them to Benjamin Cross's missing records. Daniel did not mind. For the first time in months, he was tired at night for a reason. His hands hurt. His back hurt. He slept 42 minutes without waking once. It felt like a victory. On the 4th morning, a black SUV came down the cracked runway. Daniel heard it before he saw it. Maverick was already standing. The SUV stopped 20 yards from the hangar. Clean tires, polished body, county seal on the door. The man who stepped out wore expensive boots that had never seen a muddy job site and a charcoal coat over a white shirt. Mid-50s, at the temples, controlled smile. Walter swore quietly. Who? Charles Whitmore. Daniel wiped his hands on a rag. Whitmore approached without hurry. His eyes moved over the repaired doorway, the cleared floor, Walter's truck, then Maverick. Mr. Hayes? Daniel Charles Whitmore? I know, something flickered behind the smile. Then Walter's been educating you. Walter stepped forward. Somebody had to. Whitmore ignored him. I'm a county commissioner. I also advise the Regional Development Partnership handling the Falcon Ridge redevelopment. Daniel caught the phrasing, Private office, private development, same man, that's convenient. Whitmore smiled again. I came to save you some trouble. He removed a folded document from his coat. Daniel did not take it. Whitmore continued. The county recognizes that auctioning Hangar 3 created an awkward situation. Legally, you hold the remaining lease interest. Practically the building is condemned, and the site is scheduled for clearance. 71 days now. Exactly. Whitmore glanced around. I understand you paid $15. That's public record. We're prepared to offer $40,000. Walter stopped moving. Daniel thought he had misheard. $40,000 to surrender your lease immediately and remove your personal property. Whitmore's eyes briefly settled on Maverick. You'd walk away this afternoon. $40,000. Daniel felt the number physically. A reliable used truck, months of rent, veterinary care for Maverick, groceries without counting every dollar, maybe treatment, maybe enough distance from Silver Creek to disappear somewhere nobody knew his history. He could stop sleeping under a roof scheduled for demolition. Stop opening a dead man's secrets. Stop wondering whether every engine on the runway belonged to somebody who wanted something from him. $40,000 for a $15 mistake. It should have been easy. Whitmore seemed to read the hesitation. You've served your country. Daniel's expression changed. Whitmore noticed too late. I looked you up, he said. Why? Due diligence. You perform due diligence on everyone who buys county scrap? It's not scrap. The answer came too quickly. Silence followed. Walter looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at Whitmore. No, Daniel said quietly. Apparently, it isn't. Whitmore recovered. What I mean is that the redevelopment has significant value. You're standing in the middle of a project larger than one deteriorated building. He held the paper out again. 40,000. No lawyers, no headaches. You and your dog could be somewhere warm tonight. Daniel looked at the contract. His hand almost moved. Maverick stepped between them, not aggressively, no bark, no growl. He simply positioned his body across Daniel's knees, blocking Whitmore's approach. Maverick, the dog, stayed. Whitmore gave a small laugh. He doesn't like strangers, he likes plenty of strangers. Whitmore's smile faded slightly. His gaze moved past the dog, toward the middle of the hangar, toward the steel maintenance trench. Daniel noticed. Whitmore looked away, then looked back. Not at the roof, not at the workbench, at the floor, exactly where the hidden stairwell lay beneath the plate Daniel and Walter had carefully replaced. Daniel felt his heartbeat slow, the way it used to before things went bad. Have you been inside this building before? He asked. Whitmore's eyes returned to him. Years ago. How many? I couldn't say. Try. Walter watched silently. Whitmore slipped the contract back into his coat. I don't understand the relevance. You drove all the way out here with $40,000 for a lease worth $15,000. Daniel stepped closer. You looked at that section of floor 3 times since you arrived. Whitmore's expression hardened. Only a little, but enough. You're reading too much into things. Occupational habit. Whitmore took another step forward. Daniel heard the man's boot scrape concrete. The sound sharpened. His vision narrowed. For one instant, the hangar became too bright. Whitmore's hand moving. A different man's hand. A doorway overseas. Aaron's voice. Daniel's fingers curled. His body wanted to solve the distance between them in the fastest way it knew. Then Maverick leaned hard against his knee. Pressure, warmth, present. Daniel inhaled through his nose. Rust, cold air, oil, Montana. He opened his hand. Whitmore had seen enough to realize something had happened, but not enough to understand what. Mr. Hayes? Daniel's voice was calm when he answered. No. No what? No deal. Whitmore stared at him. Think carefully. I did. $40,000 is a substantial return on $15,000. Then you should have bought it. That landed. Walter almost smiled. Whitmore looked toward him. You've always had a talent for making simple things difficult, Walter. And your family always had a talent for calling difficult things simple. The two men held each other's eyes. Daniel heard 22 years of history in the silence. Whitmore turned back. 75 days was the original term. You now have 71, I can count. Good. Whitmore walked toward his SUV. At the driver's door, he stopped. When that lease expires, none of this belongs to you. He drove away. Maverick remained standing until the SUV disappeared beyond the gate. Walter exhaled. You just turned down 40 grand, I noticed. You have 40 grand? No. A place to live after this? No. A functioning truck? Debatable. Walter looked at him. Then why'd you say no? Daniel stared toward the maintenance trench. Because he wasn't paying me $40,000 for the hangar. Walter waited. He was paying me $40,000 not to find something. That night, Daniel and Maverick drove into Silver Creek for food and supplies. Martha filled a thermos with coffee without charging him and packed 2 sandwiches in brown paper. You look tired, she said. Improvement. How means I'm sleeping occasionally. She accepted that answer. Daniel did not mention Whitmore, not yet. It was nearly 10 when the Ford turned back onto the Falcon Ridge Road. Fresh snow had begun falling. The headlights swept across the old gate. Maverick rose in the passenger seat. Daniel saw nothing unusual. Then the dog growled. The side door of Hangar 3 was open. Daniel knew he had locked it. He killed the headlights 50 yards away. Maverick, stay close. They approached through darkness. No voices, no vehicle. The lock had not been broken. Someone had picked it or used a key. Inside, Daniel switched on his flashlight. The sleeping area was untouched. His duffel remained closed. The toolbox was there. Walter's equipment was there. Nothing obvious had been stolen. Then Maverick moved toward the maintenance trench. The steel plate had shifted half an inch. Daniel's stomach tightened. They went down. Cabinets stood open. Old rescue boxes had been pulled from shelves. Photographs had been moved. The Blackhorn map hung crooked. Someone had searched the room. Looking for the logs, Daniel whispered. Maverick continued past him. The dog crossed to the far wall, a solid concrete wall. He lowered his nose, sniffed, then sat. Daniel swept the flashlight across the floor. Mud, fresh boot mud. One print, then another. They ended at the wall. Daniel crouched. The concrete looked continuous, but along the bottom edge, almost invisible beneath dust, was a narrow straight line. Too straight. Dan ran his fingers across it. A seam. He looked at Maverick. The Malinois stared at the wall. Someone had entered Falcon Ridge while Daniel was gone. Someone who knew about the underground room. And whatever they had been searching for, they believed it was behind that wall. Daniel did not touch the seam again. Not yet. He photographed everything first. The boot prints, the displaced boxes, the crooked map, the narrow line beneath the concrete. Old habits had kept him alive in places where one careless hand could destroy the only useful piece of evidence in a room. Maverick stood beside him, nose working. Find it. The Malinois lowered his head and followed the muddy scent along the wall, 6 feet. 10. Then he stopped beside an old communications cabinet bolted to the concrete. Daniel shined his flashlight behind it. Nothing. Maverick pushed his nose against the cabinet's lower corner. What do you want? The dog scratched once. Daniel almost smiled. Of course it is. Walter arrived 40 minutes later wearing coveralls over long underwear, and an expression that suggested being awakened after midnight was a personal insult. Then he saw the room. The irritation vanished. Nobody knew this was open except you and me, and whoever searched it. Walter studied the boot prints. Whitmore? Maybe. That's a yes in polite language. It's a maybe until we can prove otherwise. Walter looked at him. You always this careful? I learned to be. They went to work. The cabinet was heavier than it looked. Daniel removed 4 rusted floor bolts while Walter disconnected ancient cables disappearing into the wall. Together they shifted it 6 inches. A rectangular section of concrete appeared behind it. Not concrete. Painted steel. Walter stared. I worked in this room 30 years. You ever move that cabinet? Never had a reason. Maverick sat beside the panel. Daniel found 2 concealed latches beneath layers of paint. The false wall opened inward. Behind it was a cavity no deeper than Daniel's arm. Inside sat one object, a military-style flight case, olive green, waterproof, heavy. Walter whispered, Benny. Daniel carried it to the radio desk. There was no lock, only 2 steel clasps. He opened them. The smell of old paper rose into the room. Inside were flight logs, not 1, 7. Black covers, carefully labeled by year. Beneath them were envelopes of photographs, cassette tapes, weather records, copies of county correspondence, handwritten notes, and a thick folder marked Black Horn, Originals. Walter sat down. He didn't seem to realize he had. 22 years, Daniel opened the folder. The first page was Benjamin Cross's flight report, December 14th, Black Horn search. Daniel read silently until Walter said, out loud. Daniel began. Launch 1. Located party at 0942. Severe wind. Visibility intermittent. He turned the page. Launch 2. Removed 2 survivors from lower shelf. Returned Falcon Ridge 1118. Walter closed his eyes. Daniel continued. Refueled. Dispatch instructed all aircraft to avoid western face due to reported instability. Then the handwriting changed, pressed harder. I observed flash on West Ridge at approximately 11:47, followed by audible concussion. Snow fracture began seconds afterward. Daniel stopped. Walter opened his eyes. Explosion. What he wrote. The next document was a photograph. Black Horn in a storm. At first, Daniel saw only snow and rock. Then he noticed a dark line cutting across the western slope. A road. Beside it were 2 pieces of heavy equipment. One carried a company mark. Whitmore Timber. Walter leaned closer. There, another photograph showed stacked drilling pipe. Another showed a temporary blasting shelter. The dates printed along the photo margins were from the week of the avalanche. Daniel found a typed complaint addressed to the county. Unauthorized blasting within winter restriction zone, signed Benjamin Cross, 3 days before the avalanche, he warned them. Walter's voice sounded hollow. Daniel found the response. No action required. Inspection deferred. Then another document. Cross had filed a second complaint after the disaster. This one alleged that dispatch ordered him away from the western face not because the slope was naturally unstable, but because county officials knew Whitmore crews were operating there without proper winter authorization. Daniel turned to Walter. Who was running Whitmore then? Everett Whitmore, Charles's father. Walter nodded. Daniel kept reading. The official report claimed Cross made 1 unauthorized flight and became disoriented in the storm. His own records showed 3 flights. The first located the group, the second evacuated 2 people, the third launched after the avalanche. He went back, Daniel said. Of course he went back. Cross's third flight lasted nearly 2 hours. Weather notes described whiteout conditions, icing, and violent downdrafts. A cassette tape lay in an envelope marked Flight 3. Walter found an old recorder in the communications cabinet. It took 20 minutes to clean the battery contacts and connect temporary power. The tape hissed. Static filled the room. Then a man's voice emerged. Older. Calm. Falcon Ridge 1, approaching Blackhorn from southeast. Walter's hand went to his mouth. Benny. Daniel listened. Dispatch answered through distortion. Falcon Ridge 1, return immediately. Western sector closed. Cross replied. I have visual on survivors. Negative. Return. 2 moving below the shelf. Falcon Ridge 1, you are ordered back. A pause. Then Cross's voice. Copy your order. Another pause. I'm going in. Walter laughed once through tears. Stubborn old fool. The tape continued. Wind, engine noise, radio static. Then Cross again. Tell the ambulance to meet me at Falcon Ridge. Daniel looked at Walter. He got somebody out. Walter nodded slowly. Official report never said that. The recording jumped. Cross's voice returned later, strained now. Secondary slide. Can't reach upper shelf. Static. Repeat. Cannot reach upper shelf. Then quieter. 3 still missing. Daniel understood. Those were the 3 teenagers who died. Cross had not arrived too late. He had been there. He had gone back, and when the mountain came down a second time, there had been nothing left he could do. Daniel sat very still. 15 years earlier, Gregory Nolan had said $1,800 was missing. The accusation had been enough. No proof, no hearing, no one willing to ask the next question. His mother had stood behind glass and allowed the easiest story to become the official one. Benjamin Cross had lived the same wound on a scale large enough to bury a rescue unit. Walter said, "You all right?" Daniel closed the folder. "No." He looked at Cross's handwriting. "But I know what this is." "What?" "A man getting sentenced by the version everybody found convenient. For the first time since leaving the Navy, anger did not feel empty. It pointed somewhere. Hangar had spent months waking with no reason to stand. Except Maverick needed food, and daylight eventually came whether Daniel wanted it or not. Now there was a dead man beneath a ruined reputation. There was evidence. There was a company. There were names. There was a mission. Maverick rested his chin on Daniel's knee. Daniel put his hand between the dog's ears. "We're staying." Walter heard him. "Thought you already were." "No." Daniel looked around the underground room. "I was hiding. Morning found them still working." Snowlight descended through the stairwell while Daniel arranged Cross's records across the radio desk. One document did not fit the rest. A property survey, Falcon Ridge Airfield and surrounding acreage. Daniel unfolded it across the map table. Walter, the old mechanic, came over. "What? County boundaries here?" Daniel pointed. "But this survey has it almost half a mile east." Walter frowned. "Old map, maybe." Daniel compared it with the county redevelopment notice he had brought downstairs. The modern document showed Falcon Ridge entirely inside county property. Cross's survey did not. A handwritten note ran along the margin, "Stewardship is not ownership." Daniel's pulse changed. He followed the old boundary north, then west, then south. It enclosed not just the runway, wheat ground, pine forest, part of the frozen irrigation canal, hundreds of acres. Walter stared. "How much land is that?" Daniel found a number near the survey seal. 587 acres, Walter whistled softly. "The county's been calling that theirs longer than you've been alive." Daniel found another sheet folded behind the survey. It referenced a trust, Cross Mountain Rescue Trust. Several lines had faded beyond readability, but one sentence remained clear. "County stewardship shall remain temporary and conditional." Walter looked at Daniel. "What does that mean?" It means we need a property lawyer. Daniel folded the document carefully. Above them, wind moved across the broken roof. Below, the old rescue room no longer felt like a grave. It felt like evidence. Maverick rose and walked toward the black horn photograph. Daniel watched him. 24 hours earlier, Daniel had been a homeless former SEAL with a condemned $15 hangar and 70 days left before a bulldozer arrived. Now he had proof that Benjamin Cross had been framed, and something potentially more dangerous. A map suggesting the county preparing to demolish Falcon Ridge might never have owned Falcon Ridge at all. By noon, Daniel had the name of a lawyer. Rachel Bennett worked from a narrow brick office above a pharmacy in downtown Silver Creek. She was 42, direct, practical, and unimpressed by dramatic stories until they came with documents. Daniel brought documents. He brought Cross's survey, the trust reference, copies of the flight records, and photographs of every original before locking them back inside the underground room. Rachel spent nearly an hour saying almost nothing. Maverick lay beneath her conference table. Daniel sat facing the door. Finally, Rachel removed her glasses. "Where did you get these under the hangar?" "That's not an answer I hear often. It's the answer." She unfolded the survey again. My father knew Benjamin Cross. Walter had told Daniel that much. Rachel's father had broken his pelvis and suffered internal injuries after a horse rolled on him in the Bitterroots. Cross had flown him out before weather closed the valley. Rachel had been 12. He wouldn't take payment, she said. My mother mailed him checks for 6 months. What happened? He mailed everyone back. A small smile appeared. On the last envelope he wrote, "Buy Rachel better riding boots." The smile disappeared. My father wore those boots out, reminding me who paid for them. Daniel slid the redevelopment notice toward her. Rachel compared the legal descriptions. Her expression changed. "This isn't a small discrepancy. How big? I don't know yet. Can you find out? Us. How long? Depends how deeply somebody buried the title history." Daniel looked at her. "You think it was buried?" "I think counties make clerical mistakes. I also think 587 acres do not usually wander into public ownership by accident." She stood. "I'll check the recorder's office, state archives, trust registrations, tax records. Don't move anything else. Demolition clock's running." "I know." Rachel gathered the copies. At the door, she stopped. "And Daniel, yeah? If Charles Whitmore offers you money again, don't sign so much as a napkin." Daniel almost smiled. "I already disappointed him. I imagine you'll get another opportunity." When Daniel returned to Falcon Ridge, the afternoon had gone colorless. Snow hung low over the Bitterroots. Walter had gone into town for stovepipe. The hangar was quiet. Then Maverick stopped outside. His ears came forward. A gray sedan stood beside Daniel's truck. Daniel knew it, not the car, the woman beside it. Susan Hayes looked smaller than he remembered. 15 years had silvered her brown hair and put lines around her mouth. She wore a blue winter coat and held her gloves in both hands as if she needed something to keep them from shaking. Daniel stopped 20 feet away. Maverick moved slightly in front of him. "Daniel." He had heard his mother say his name in dreams, usually from behind glass. "How did you find me, Martha?" "Of course." Susan looked toward the hangar. "I heard you were back." "I've been back a while, I know." That answer hurt more than he expected. She took one step closer. Maverick watched her. "Does he bite?" "Not without a reason." Susan stopped. "What's his name?" "Maverick. He's beautiful." Daniel said nothing. Snow collected in Maverick's dark coat. Susan looked at her son. "I've called, sometimes. You didn't answer." "Sometimes." She absorbed it. I need to tell you something. Daniel looked toward the mountains. Every instinct told him to walk inside, close the door, control the distance. Instead, he stayed. Susan's eyes filled before she began. You didn't steal that money. Daniel looked back at her. No, I know. I knew too. Gregory lied. That part wasn't complicated. The business was failing. Worse than he told anyone. Suppliers were calling. Payroll was late. He'd borrowed against equipment. Her voice trembled. He needed somebody to blame. Daniel felt 19 again. $67. A duffel bag. New brass locks. Why now? Because I left him. Daniel waited. The company finally closed. There wasn't anything left to hide behind anymore. She swallowed. He admitted it. Congratulations. The word came colder than Daniel intended. Susan flinched. I'm not asking you to make this easy. Good. He told me he chose you because you were already talking about leaving. Military, college, anywhere. He said people would believe a 19-year-old kid took cash before they'd believe a grown man couldn't keep his business alive. Daniel stared at her. Did you believe him? No. The answer came immediately. That was worse. Daniel's jaw tightened. Susan began crying. I suspected almost from the beginning. You knew. I didn't know. Not completely. You knew enough. She looked down. Yes. The hangar behind Daniel creaked in the wind. A sheet of loose metal tapped somewhere overhead. You remember that morning? Susan asked. Daniel laughed once. There was no humor in it. Every detail. Mile. You had the blue robe. Susan covered her mouth. You were holding the white mug with the chipped handle. Her tears came harder. I could see you behind the storm door. I know. Gregory changed the locks. I know. Daniel stepped closer. But that's not what stayed with me. Susan looked at him. You didn't come to the door, Mom. His voice remained quiet. That made every word heavier. He changed the locks. But you were the one who didn't come to the door. I was afraid. So was I. I thought if I challenged him, you might lose the house. Susan closed her eyes. Yes, Daniel nodded. And you decided I was cheaper. No, that's what happened. I told myself you were strong. I was 19. I know. You told yourself I'd land on my feet because that made it easier to watch me walk away. Susan had no defense left. Daniel saw it, and strangely, winning the argument brought him nothing, no relief. No satisfaction, just exhaustion. I don't know how to fix it, she whispered. You don't. Susan's face crumpled. Daniel forced himself to continue. Not with one conversation, she nodded. You can come back. Her eyes lifted. Not to take me home. There isn't a home to go back to. He looked at Falcon Ridge. But you can come here again. Maybe. Maybe. That's what I have. Susan wiped her face. I'll take maybe. She looked at Maverick. The dog had not approached her. He had not growled either. He simply watched. Susan left before dark. Daniel stood outside until her taillights disappeared along the runway. Red lights, 2 of them, growing smaller. Something inside him shifted. The runway vanished. Another road appeared. Dust, night vision green, convoy lights ahead, Aaron Cole's vehicle, then white light. A flash. Daniel heard himself breathing. Too fast. He knew where he was. That was the worst part. Knowing did not stop it. Aaron was 20 yards ahead. Then 10. Daniel could hear radio traffic. Someone yelling, his own voice calling Aaron's name. The memory folded over the present until Montana, and somewhere thousands of miles away, occupied the same piece of ground. Daniel dropped to one knee. Maverick reached him. The Malinois pushed his muzzle beneath Daniel's hands. Daniel pulled away. Maverick followed. Not now. The dog pressed closer. Maverick. A paw landed against Daniel's thigh. Daniel shut his eyes. Wrong choice. The explosion came back. He opened them. Maverick climbed partly across his lap, forcing nearly 70 pounds of warm living weight against Daniel's chest. Daniel grabbed the dog's harness. Maverick. The dog licked once beneath his jaw. Daniel breathed. Montana. Another breath. Falcon Ridge. He felt Maverick's ribs moving. You're here. The dog remained against him. So am I. It took 20 minutes. Afterward, Daniel sat on the frozen concrete, drained. He hated how tired fear made him. He hated that a pair of taillights could do what gunfire once could not. Most of all, he hated that Falcon Ridge had started mattering. Things that mattered could be lost. Aaron had mattered. His father had mattered. His mother had mattered. Daniel looked at the hangar. He suddenly understood what he needed to do, love first, before Falcon Ridge could become another thing he survived. He packed quickly, sleeping bag, clothes, Cross's copied records, food, Maverick's gear. He carried everything to the truck. Walter would understand eventually. Rachel could handle the legal mess. The county could have its land. Whitmore could have his mountain. Daniel had spent 15 years learning how to leave. Maverick. The dog stood inside the hangar. Load up. Nothing. Daniel opened the passenger door. Come on. Maverick looked at him. Load, the command voice, clear, absolute. The same tone Maverick had obeyed overseas when helicopters screamed overhead and rounds cracked through walls. The dog turned around. Maverick. He walked deeper into the hangar. Daniel followed. Load up. Maverick descended the hidden stairs. Daniel felt anger rise. Don't do this. The dog entered the operations room, then lay down beneath the photograph of Benjamin Cross and Shadow. Daniel stared at him. You're disobeying me. Maverick lowered his head onto his paws. It was the second time. The first had uncovered the room. Now Daniel understood what this refusal meant. The dog was not refusing danger. He was refusing Daniel's retreat. Daniel leaned against the wall. You don't get to decide where we live. Maverick watched him. Daniel laughed weakly. Apparently you do. Silence filled the room. Daniel looked at Cross, at Shadow, at the names covering the wall, at the place where people had once gone out into terrible weather because somebody they had never met needed them. What do you know that I don't? Maverick stood. His ears lifted. Then he walked past Daniel, up the stairs, across the hangar. He stopped beside an old hydraulic aircraft lift, half buried beneath rusted chains and broken machinery. The dog sniffed, once, twice, then began pawing furiously at the base. Daniel followed. Maverick, the dog scratched harder. Daniel knelt. Beneath years of grease, he saw something that did not belong. One section of the steel track had newer bolts than everything around it. Not new, but newer. Daniel wiped away the dirt. A narrow rectangular plate appeared beneath the lift. Something had been sealed underneath it. Daniel looked toward the packed truck outside, then back at Maverick. The Malinois sat beside the hidden plate, waiting. Daniel slowly removed his coat. He reached for his father's old multi-tool. And for the second time that night, Daniel Hayes decided not to leave. The bolts under the hydraulic lift had not moved in years. Daniel worked slowly. Metal complained against metal, while Maverick sat beside him, watching every turn of the tool as though he had personally assigned the job. You could have found this tomorrow. Maverick blinked. That's what I thought. The fourth bolt finally broke loose. Daniel lifted the rectangular plate. Underneath was not another room. It was a narrow cavity cut into the concrete. Inside lay a steel tube about 3 feet long, sealed at both ends with threaded caps and coated in black grease. Daniel stared at it. Cross-like hiding things, Maverick lowered his nose toward the opening. Leave it. The dog looked at him. Daniel almost laughed. Now you listen. He pulled the tube free. It was heavier than expected. He carried it to the workbench and called Walter first, then Rachel. Neither appreciated the hour. Both came anyway. Rachel arrived 20 minutes after Walter, wearing jeans beneath a long winter coat, her hair tied back, a leather document case under one arm. She saw Daniel's packed truck outside. You leaving? I changed my mind. Rachel glanced at Maverick. Did you? Daniel ignored that. Walter pointed at the steel tube. Open it. Daniel unscrewed the first cap. Inside was waxed canvas, dry, protected. He pulled out a rolled packet tied with cord. Rachel immediately raised a hand. Before anybody unfolds anything, photographs. Walter groaned. Lawyers. You're welcome to explain to a judge why 3 men and a dog contaminated original property records. Walter looked at Maverick. She's including you. They documented everything. Then Rachel untied the cord. The first document was a deed, heavy paper, embossed seal. Falcon Ridge, property conveyance. Daniel watched Rachel's eyes move down the page. Once, twice, then back to the beginning. What? She didn't answer. Rachel, the county doesn't own this. Walter pulled his chair closer. What do you mean? I mean exactly that. She flattened the deed carefully. Benjamin and Margaret Cross transferred Falcon Ridge Airfield and 587 acres into a charitable trust 31 years ago. The Cross Mountain Rescue Trust, Daniel said. Rachel looked at him. Yes. She reached for the second document, a trust agreement. The language was dense, but Rachel translated as she read. The land was to remain dedicated to emergency aviation, wilderness rescue, disaster response, medical transport, search dog operations, and training. County government was granted temporary stewardship if the rescue unit became unable to operate. Temporary, Daniel said. That's the important word. Walter leaned over the page. So when Benny shut Falcon Ridge down after Black Horn, the county became steward, not owner, correct? Daniel looked toward the hangar doors. Then how did they schedule redevelopment? Rachel's expression hardened. That is a question somebody is going to have to answer. She found the relevant clause. If no qualified rescue organization exists here, the county can maintain stewardship. And if one does, Rachel kept reading, then the trust can be reactivated. Silence. Walter looked at Daniel. Daniel noticed. No. Walter smiled. I didn't say anything. Your face did. Rachel continued through the document. Military search and rescue, wilderness emergency response, certified aviation operations, K9 search capability. Her eyes lifted toward Maverick, then Daniel, former Navy SEAL. Daniel said nothing. Retired military working dog, still nothing. You have wilderness training? Yes. Emergency medicine? Combat medicine. Rescue swimming, navigation, mountain movement. Walter's smile widened. Stop enjoying this. I'm 73. Let me have things. Rachel pulled out another page. This amendment is newer. The paper bore Benjamin Cross's signature, dated less than a year before his death. It expanded the trust mission. Emergency housing for displaced first responders, veteran transition support, working dog rehabilitation, temporary shelter for veterans experiencing homelessness. Daniel went completely still. Rachel read the line again. Temporary shelter for veterans experiencing homelessness. The hangar seemed to change around him. $15. The waterline Martha had mentioned. The hidden room, the cot, the roof. Daniel looked toward his packed truck. Cross had written rules for a man he would never meet, maybe not Daniel specifically. That somehow made it more powerful. He didn't know me, Daniel said. No, Rachel replied. He couldn't have. No. Daniel touched the edge of the amendment. Then why does this feel like he did? Walter answered. Maybe because Benny knew what broken people looked like. Rachel turned another page. Her eyebrows tightened. There's a deadline provision. Daniel's attention snapped back. What deadline? If stewardship is challenged through reactivation, the trust has to demonstrate a legitimate operating mission before the county completes a lawful abandonment process. English. Rachel looked at him. If Whitmore gets the trust declared permanently abandoned first, Falcon Ridge can transfer. How long? I need the county filings. Guess days, maybe weeks. Walter cursed softly. Rachel kept reading. There's something else. Of course there was. She removed a bank statement, then another. Old royalty statements, timber easements, mineral leases, agricultural leases on portions of the acreage. Most were small, some were decades old. Rachel took out her phone and began calculating. Daniel watched her expression change. What? She calculated again. That can't be right, Rachel. She looked at him. The trust has assets. How much at the last statement here? Just over $3 million. Walter whistled. But this statement is 11 years old. Rachel began checking account references. Royalties continued. Investment instructions remained active. How much now? I can't know without current records. Estimate. Rachel hesitated. Possibly $4 million. Walter leaned back. Daniel said nothing. $4 million. He had slept in his truck 3 nights earlier because he could not justify spending $90 on a motel. He had rationed Maverick's food more carefully than his own. Now he was sitting above land connected to millions. Walter laughed softly. $15 investment worked out. No, Rachel's voice cut through the moment. Both men looked at her. This money isn't Daniel's. Daniel felt something strangely close to relief. Rachel tapped the trust. He cannot cash it out. Cannot sell the land for personal gain. Cannot buy himself a house. Cannot turn this into retirement money. What can it pay for? Walter asked. Falcon Ridge, she began counting. Rescue aircraft, fuel, emergency vehicles, search equipment, canine training, building restoration, insurance, veteran transition programs, temporary housing. Dan looked at Maverick. So the money only exists if the mission exists, essentially. Walter smiled. Benny. Daniel understood why. Cross had hidden millions in the only form a desperate man could not waste becoming comfortable. Purpose. Rachel gathered the documents. Nobody outside this room hears about the assets yet. Agreed. I'm filing for emergency recognition of the trust, first thing tomorrow. Daniel looked at the black windows. What do you need from me? A mission statement. Operational plan. Proof of qualifications. Proof Maverick service history. A proposed independent board. You're not becoming king of 587 acres. Wasn't planning on it. Good. Because Cross wasn't either. She paused. And we need to establish actual rescue use. Daniel looked around the ruined hangar. One working water line, no reliable electricity, a roof that admitted snow. With what? Walter spoke. Benny's old rescue aircraft. Daniel turned. What aircraft? Walter looked almost guilty. The red one from the photograph. Daniel stared. You told me it was gone. I said I didn't know where Cross's logs were. Where's the airplane? Barn outside Stevensville. Does it run? Walter considered the question. Define run. Rachel rubbed her forehead. Wonderful. Daniel almost smiled. Then she checked her phone. Her expression changed. What? Rachel turned the screen toward him. A county filing. Notice of final abandonment review. Hearing date. 9 days away. Daniel read it twice. Whitmore knew. Yes, the 40,000. He wanted you gone before this became discoverable. Daniel looked toward the underground stairwell. 9 days. He had planned his life in shorter windows than that. But never with 587 acres. A dead man's reputation. An abandoned rescue aircraft. And $4 million locked behind a mission he had not asked for. Rachel gathered the original deed and amendment into protective sleeves. We file tomorrow. Walter stood. I'll get the airplane. Daniel looked at Maverick. The dog remained beside the opened steel tube, calm now. Mission accomplished. Daniel walked outside. The storm had passed. Moonlight lay across the runway. Beyond it, the Bitterroots rose white and enormous against the night. For months, Daniel had believed the hardest question in his life was where he could sleep without being told to move. Now the question was different. Could a man who barely trusted himself to remain anywhere become caretaker of a place built for people who had nowhere else to go? Behind him, one weak hangar light burned through the open side door. Daniel stared at it. 9 days, that was all they had to prove Falcon Ridge was not abandoned. 9 days to turn a condemned hangar into a living rescue operation. 9 days before Charles Whitmore could take the land. And somewhere beneath all of it sat approximately $4.1 million that Daniel could never personally own, but could use to build the one thing he had spent half his life believing did not exist. A place where being broken did not mean being thrown away. By sunrise, Falcon Ridge was no longer quiet. Walter returned with 2 pickups, a flatbed trailer, and 6 people Daniel had never met. Martha arrived 20 minutes later carrying coffee, breakfast sandwiches, and the news that half of Silver Creek already knew something was happening at the airfield. Daniel stared at her. I didn't tell anybody. You told Walter. Walter looked offended. I told 3 people. Martha handed Daniel a coffee. In Silver Creek, that's called a press release, but 10 volunteers were clearing scrap from the West Bay. An electrician examined the old service panel. 2 ranchers patched roof seams. Someone brought a portable generator. Someone else brought propane heaters. Daniel kept waiting for the moment when somebody asked what they would get in return. Nobody did. Rachel arrived shortly before noon. Filed. Daniel stopped carrying lumber. The trust emergency petition for reactivation. Supporting documents are logged with the court and state charities office. Originals secure. Daniel nodded. That mattered more than he could explain. Rachel looked around the hangar. You've been busy. Apparently I have a town now. Maverick moved among the workers without interfering, checking every new arrival before returning to Daniel. Rachel watched him. He's doing security. He's always doing security. So are you. Daniel looked at her. Rachel nodded toward his coffee. You've moved it 3 times so nobody can stand behind you. Daniel glanced at the cup. He had not noticed. I'll add that to my list. Add sleeping. I slept. When? Recently. Rachel decided not to argue. The first official problem arrived that afternoon. A county inspector, then another. Fire code, structural safety. Environmental compliance. Each carried paperwork. Each was polite. Each found something. The next morning, the power company disconnected the old service completely, citing unresolved violations dating back 12 years. By afternoon, an environmental notice appeared at the gate concerning possible fuel contamination. Tore it down. Rachel made him put it back. Evidence. It's garbage. Garbage can still be evidence. On the third day, someone broke into Walter's workshop in town. Nothing valuable disappeared. No cash. No tools. Only the folder containing copies of Cross's Black Horn records. Walter stood in the hangar afterward, furious. They knew exactly what shelf. Dan looked at the damaged lock photographs. Then we assume they know what we have. They don't have the originals. No, Daniel looked toward Rachel. But we stopped keeping anything important in one place. They duplicated everything. One set went to Rachel. One to a state investigator she trusted. One into a bank box. Daniel uploaded digital copies from Martha's Diner because Falcon Ridge still had no internet. The more pressure came, the more careful he became. It felt familiar. Not combat planning contingencies, redundancy, protecting people instead of hunting threats. For the first time, the skills he had spent years trying to forget seemed capable of building something. Then Walter brought the airplane. It arrived on the 6th morning inside an enclosed livestock trailer because Walter said exposing it to road salt would be an act of war. The aircraft that emerged was smaller than Daniel expected. Red paint faded nearly pink, fabric torn along one wing. Engine cowling removed. Dust covered everything, but the name beneath the cockpit remained visible. Falcon Ridge Rescue 1, Maverick sniffed one wheel. Walter rested a hand on the fuselage. Benny flew this into Black Horn. Niall looked at the aircraft. This is the one, and you hid it in a barn, stored it, for 22 years. That's what stored means when you're stubborn. They worked until midnight, not to make it airworthy. That would take longer. They only needed to prove Falcon Ridge was becoming operational again. Walter rebuilt what he could. Daniel cataloged rescue equipment. Volunteers installed lights. Rachel assembled the legal package. Martha somehow found 12 retired firefighters willing to sign letters supporting the rescue trust. 7 days ago, Daniel had owned almost nothing. Now people kept asking him where he wanted things. It terrified him more than he admitted. On the 8th day, the weather turned. The Bitterroots disappeared behind a wall of gray. The forecast called for 12 inches. They got nearly twice that. By evening, Highway 93 was closing in sections. Wind drove snow sideways across Falcon Ridge. Daniel sent the volunteers home before the roads became impossible. Walter refused. You're 73 and I don't want to explain to your doctor why I let you freeze. My doctor's 76. He'll understand. Rachel finally convinced him. You both need to be at the hearing tomorrow. Walter pointed at Daniel. Tell him. Daniel looked at the old mechanic. Go home. Walter muttered something impolite, but he went. By 11, Falcon Ridge was empty except for Daniel and Maverick. The generator hummed outside. The restored lights cast long white bars across the hangar. Snow hissed against the roof. Daniel sat on the cot in the back room, reviewing Rachel's hearing notes. Maverick lay near the door. 9 days, Daniel said. The dog opened one eye. Tomorrow either Cross gets his name back or we become trespassers. Maverick closed the eye. Appreciate the confidence. Daniel turned another page. Then the lights went out. The generator stopped. Not sputtered. Stopped. Instantly. Darkness. Daniel did not move. Maverick did. The dog stood, ears forward. Daniel reached for his flashlight. Stay, he listened. Wind, roof metal, nothing else. Then Maverick growled. Low. Daniel switched on the flashlight. The beam cut across the room. Empty. He stepped into the hangar. Generator probably iced. Maverick ignored the explanation. He moved toward the east wall. Daniel followed. The dog stopped, raised his nose, then turned sharply toward Daniel. Daniel smelled it. Smoke, not wood smoke from the stove. Chemical. Hot insulation. Fuel. A thin black ribbon appeared beneath the backroom wall. Outside, Maverick hesitated. Go. This time he obeyed. Daniel opened the side door. Wind blasted snow inside. Maverick ran into the storm. Daniel grabbed the extinguisher and returned. Orange light flickered behind the interior wall. Too fast. He understood immediately. This was not an electrical short. He cut the main breaker anyway, then moved the two portable fuel cans toward the door. Smoke thickened. The east wall cracked loudly. Flames climbed behind the plywood. Daniel dragged the first fuel can outside, then the second. He looked toward the underground stairwell, the fireproof evidence case. Rachel had taken the deed, but Cross's original flight logs and radio tapes had been returned that afternoon for Walter's hearing preparation. They were downstairs. Daniel went back. Outside, Maverick barked. Stay! Daniel lifted the floor plate. Smoke rolled along the ceiling. He descended. The underground room was clearer. He found the fireproof case beneath the radio desk. Heavy. He grabbed the handle. Above him something crashed. The lights were gone. Only his flashlight remained. Daniel started up. A violent metallic groan moved through the hangar. He knew the sound. Structure failing. He dropped back. A section of roof support came down across the stairwell. Steel struck concrete. The opening disappeared. Daniel froze. Then training took over. Assess, breathe, exit. There had to be another route. Smoke began descending through gaps around the collapsed steel. Daniel pulled his shirt over his mouth. He searched the room. No windows, no exterior door. He tried moving the beam. It did not shift. Outside, Maverick barked again. Daniel heard Walter's voice suddenly. Maverick! Walter! He must have turned back. Daniel shouted, Keep him out! Smoke swallowed the words. He coughed. His chest tightened. Not now. A memory tried to open. Aaron. Fire. Collapsed wall. Daniel forced it shut. Falcon Ridge, he whispered. He dragged the evidence case toward the far wall, Montana. Another cough. Maverick's outside. Above him, the dog barked wildly. Walter shouted something Daniel could not understand. Then came a sound Daniel knew better than almost anything. A command. Walter yelling, Stay! Silence. For half a second. Daniel looked toward the blocked stairwell. No, above him came claws striking concrete. Fast. Hard. Closer. Daniel's stomach dropped. Maverick, stay! The scratching stopped. Daniel waited. Please. Then metal shifted overhead. A narrow opening appeared between the fallen support and the stair edge. A black muzzle pushed through. Maverick! The dog forced his head into the gap. Daniel's fear became anger. No! Out! Maverick disappeared. Daniel almost collapsed with relief. Then Walter screamed from somewhere above. Maverick! Daniel heard claws racing across the burning hangar, not away from him, toward another opening. The dog had not retreated. He had changed routes. Daniel stared through the smoke. Maverick! A crash answered, then barking, closer. Daniel understood. The Malinois had broken command, for the third time, and somewhere above the underground room, with fire moving across Falcon Ridge and the roof beginning to fail, Maverick was trying to find another way down to him. Daniel heard the dog before he saw him. Claws scraped somewhere beyond the concrete wall. Then came a metallic crash, a bark, closer now. Daniel swept his flashlight through the smoke. The beam found the old communications cabinet they had moved days earlier. Behind it was the narrow cavity where Cross's flight case had been hidden. The false panel stood open. Daniel understood. The cavity was deeper than they had realized. There had to be a maintenance passage behind it. "Maverick!" the dog barked once. Daniel shoved the cabinet aside. Smoke burned his eyes. He dropped to one knee and reached into the opening. Nothing. Then a black muzzle appeared. Daniel grabbed Maverick's harness. The Malinois squeezed through the narrow passage and nearly knocked him backward. "You idiot!" Maverick pressed against him. Daniel buried one hand in the dog's neck. For half a second, he forgot the fire. Then something crashed overhead. The room shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. "Okay." Daniel coughed. "You found a way in. Find the way out." Maverick turned immediately. He entered the maintenance opening. Daniel dragged the fireproof case after him. The passage was barely wide enough for his shoulders. Old conduit ran along one side. Ahead, Maverick's body disappeared into darkness. Daniel crawled. 10 feet, 15, the air grew hotter. Then the passage angled upward. Maverick stopped. Daniel saw why. A section of sheet metal had collapsed across the exit. Beyond it, orange light pulsed. Daniel pushed. Nothing. Then metal moved half an inch. His right leg slipped between two bent braces. The steel closed around his boot. Daniel pulled. Pain shot through his knee. Stuck. Maverick back. The dog turned. Back. Maverick crawled toward him. Daniel shoved the case ahead. "Take it." The dog sniffed the handle. "No. Strap." Daniel pulled the shoulder strap free and pushed it toward Maverick. "Get it." Maverick bit down. "Pull." The dog backed up. The case scraped along concrete. Daniel braced both hands against the collapsed sheet and pushed while Maverick pulled. The steel shifted. Enough. Daniel tore his leg free. A hot edge sliced through his pant leg, but he barely felt it. "Go." Maverick dragged the case upward. Daniel followed. They emerged behind the west maintenance bay. The hangar was almost unrecognizable. Smoke rolled beneath the roof in black layers. Flames had climbed the eastern wall and were moving through old timber framing toward the center. Snow blew through the open side door and vanished into steam. Walter stood outside. Daniel could see him through the smoke. "Maverick!" The dog looked toward him. Daniel pointed. "Out!" Maverick released the case. He did not move. "Maverick, out!" The dog looked back at Daniel. For one strange second, Daniel saw another place, another fire, Aaron Cole turning in a doorway after Daniel had ordered him back. Aaron had gone anyway. There had been a wounded man inside. Daniel had survived. Aaron had not. "No," his voice broke. "Not again." Maverick stepped toward him. "Out!" A beam cracked above them. Daniel looked up. Too late. The support came down. He threw himself toward Maverick. Metal struck the floor. The dog yelped. Daniel's world narrowed to that sound. Maverick! The Malinois was beneath the edge of the fallen beam, not crushed, pinned. Daniel dropped beside him. Maverick tried to stand. His left shoulder buckled. One front paw had landed against burning debris. Daniel kicked the debris away. The smell of singed hair reached him. No, no, no. He got both hands under the steel. Too heavy. Walter appeared in the doorway. "Daniel, here!" Walter ran in despite the smoke. Together they lifted. 3 inches. Maverick crawled free. Daniel released the beam. It slammed down. Can he walk? Maverick tried. 1 step, then collapsed. Daniel looked at the fire. The case lay 10 feet away. Cross's records, 22 years of truth. He looked at Maverick. There was no decision. Daniel lifted the dog. nearly 70 pounds, dead weight against an exhausted body. Maverick's head fell against his shoulder. "Leave the case," Walter shouted. Daniel moved toward the door, then something tugged behind him. The case, its strap had caught around Maverick's harness. The dog had never released it completely. Daniel stared for half a heartbeat. Even injured, Maverick had dragged the evidence with him. Walter grabbed the case. "Go!" They ran. The eastern roof collapsed before they reached the snow. A roar of steel and flame chased them through the doorway. Daniel stumbled outside, carrying Maverick. They fell together into the snow. Walter dropped beside them. Behind them, half of Hangar 3 folded inward. Sparks rose into the storm. Daniel rolled Maverick onto his side. No response. Maverick. The dog's chest moved. Barely. Daniel touched his neck. Pulse. Fast. Too fast. "Mav, look at me." Nothing. Daniel's hands began shaking. Not the controlled tremor after adrenaline, something deeper. "No." Walter reached for him. Daniel pulled away. No, Aaron had looked still too. Daniel had put pressure on the wound, called for evacuation, kept working, kept talking, kept believing training could force the world to obey. Then the helicopter had lifted with Daniel alive and Aaron beneath a thermal blanket. Daniel had spent years asking why one seat came home occupied, and the other did not. Now Maverick lay in the snow, another teammate, another one who had ignored an order because Daniel was still inside. "Don't do this!" Daniel pressed his forehead against the dog's head. "Please," his voice collapsed. "I can't do another one." Walter knelt beside him. "Daniel, I can't. You don't know that. He came back for me. Yes, I told him to stay. I know." Daniel's breath broke. "He always comes back." Walter's voice softened. "Then you do the same." Headlights appeared through the storm. Martha had called emergency services when Walter phoned her from the road. A volunteer fire truck arrived first, then an ambulance. Walter shouted about the veterinary clinic. Daniel climbed into the back of Walter's flatbed because nobody could convince him to let Maverick go without him. They drove through the snow with the dog wrapped in blankets across Daniel's lap. The clinic lights were already on when they arrived. Dr. Emily Carter met them at the door. Daniel surrendered Maverick only because there was no other choice. Then came the waiting. It was worse than the fire. Daniel sat on the floor rather than the chair. His hands were black with soot. A tear in his pants showed dried blood along his shin. Walter sat beside him. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Daniel said, "Aaron came back too." Walter waited. "My last deployment." Daniel stared at his hands. "We had a man trapped. I ordered Aaron to hold position. He went back through the doorway. His voice became quieter. He got the man out." Walter understood the part Daniel had not said, but Aaron didn't. Daniel shook his head. "I've spent years thinking if I'd given a different command, moved faster, seen something sooner. You think his death belongs to you. It happened on my watch." Walter looked through the clinic window at the snow. "That isn't the same sentence." Daniel closed his eyes. "After Aaron, I stopped keeping people close." Walter nodded. "Can't lose what you don't keep. That was the idea. How'd it work?" Daniel looked toward the treatment room door. It didn't. The door opened. Dr. Carter came out. Daniel stood so fast the room tilted. "He's alive! Everything inside!" Daniel stopped. Shoulder injury. Burn to one front paw. Smoke exposure. "He's going to hurt for a while." "Is he?" "I think he'll recover." Daniel sat back down because his legs no longer trusted him. An hour later, they let him in. Maverick lay under a blanket, one paw bandaged, shoulder wrapped, an oxygen line near his muzzle. Daniel sat beside him. "I'm sorry." The dog's eyes opened. Barely. Daniel touched his neck. Maverick moved his good paw, slowly. It came to rest across Daniel's wrist. Daniel bowed his head. For once, he did not hide the tears. Rachel arrived just before dawn. Her coat was covered in snow. She carried the surviving deed in a waterproof folder. Behind her came a deputy and a state fire investigator. Daniel stood. "What happened?" Rachel looked toward Maverick, then at Daniel. The fire wasn't accidental. Walter's face hardened. The investigator placed photographs on the table, accelerant residue along the exterior service wall, a cut generator line, multiple ignition points. Daniel felt his anger arrive. Cold this time, controlled. Rachel put down one more photograph. There's a grain facility across the highway. Daniel remembered the abandoned elevator and the newer storage buildings beyond it. Security camera. Rachel nodded. Storm blurred the plate. She slid the image toward him. A pickup sat near Falcon Ridge less than 20 minutes before the fire. Company markings remained visible on the door. Whitmore Timber. Walter whispered something under his breath. Daniel looked through the clinic window at Maverick. The dog had nearly died. Cross's history had nearly burned a second time. Rachel placed the deed in Daniel's hands. "The hearing is tomorrow." Daniel looked at her. "You mean today?" She checked the clock. 17 a.m. today. Daniel's body hurt. His lungs hurt. His leg needed stitches he had not yet agreed to. Maverick lay behind him, bandaged and exhausted. Falcon Ridge was half destroyed. Rachel's next words were quiet. "If you can stand, we finish this." Daniel looked down at the deed Maverick had helped save, then threw the glass at the dog who had broken the one command Daniel had always trusted him to obey, not because Maverick had forgotten his training, because some things mattered more than obedience. Daniel folded the document carefully. He looked at Walter, then Rachel. "I'll stand." At 9 that morning, Daniel Hayes walked into the Silver Creek courthouse on a stitched leg, smoke-burned lungs, and less than an hour of sleep. He wore clean jeans Walter had brought from the feed store and a borrowed button-down shirt that pulled tight across his shoulders. Soot still darkened the lines around his fingernails. Maverick was not beside him. That absence felt wrong. For years, Daniel had entered every unfamiliar room knowing exactly where the dog was. Today there was only empty space against his left leg and the memory of a bandaged paw resting across his wrist. Rachel walked beside him carrying 2 document cases. Walter followed in the same dark suit he had worn to Benjamin Cross's funeral. The tie was crooked. Daniel did not tell him. The courthouse hearing room held maybe 60 people comfortably. More than 100 had come. Ranchers stood along the walls. Retired firefighters filled the back row. Families Daniel recognized from Cross's rescue photographs crowded the hallway. Martha sat near the front. Susan stood at the rear. She did not wave. She did not approach. She had simply come. Daniel noticed. That was enough for now. Charles Whitmore sat behind a table near the county attorney. Perfect suit. Perfect hair. No visible sign that a company truck carrying his family name had been recorded near a burning hangar. He looked at Daniel. Daniel looked back. Nothing passed between them. The county board chairman called the hearing to order. Rachel began, and with the land, not the fire, not Black Horn, the deed. She placed Benjamin Cross's original trust agreement into the record and walked the board through the history one document at a time. Falcon Ridge was never conveyed to Silver Creek County in fee ownership, she said. The county accepted temporary stewardship after rescue operations ceased. A board member adjusted his glasses. Counsel, We've maintained that property for over 20 years. Maintenance is not ownership. We paid taxes and insurance. The trust agreement anticipated those expenses. Rachel placed the amendment beside the deed, and the county's authority ends when a qualified humanitarian rescue operation is legally restored. The county attorney leaned toward his microphone, which has not occurred. Rachel did not look at him. It occurred yesterday at 4:42 p.m. The room changed. Daniel saw Whitmore's head turn. Rachel lifted a stamped document. The state charity's office accepted the emergency reactivation filing before the abandonment deadline. Whitmore whispered sharply to the attorney. Rachel continued. The Cross Mountain Rescue Trust is active. The chairman looked at Daniel. Mr. Hayes intends to operate it as caretaker, Rachel said, not owner. She made that distinction clear. The land cannot become Mr. Hayes's personal property. The trust assets cannot become his personal wealth. Falcon Ridge exists for rescue, emergency aviation, K-9 training, veteran transition services, and temporary shelter. The chairman looked down at the papers. How much is in the trust? Rachel answered. Current verified assets are approximately $4.1 million. A murmur moved through the room. Daniel heard someone behind him whisper, Good Lord. Whitmore leaned toward his microphone. So a homeless man purchases a $15 condemned lease and suddenly discovers $4 million? Daniel felt every eye move toward him. Whitmore continued. We are being asked to believe this is charity rather than opportunism, and Daniel's hands tightened. No Maverick, no warm shoulder against his knee. He pressed his boots into the floor instead. Rachel began to answer. Daniel touched her arm. I've got it. He stood. I don't get the money. Whitmore smiled thinly. We've heard that, then hear it again. Daniel looked at the board. I can't buy myself a house with it. Can't pay off my truck. Can't put it in my bank account. If you want somebody to audit every dollar, good. Put 3 auditors on it. A few people laughed softly. Daniel didn't. I bought the hangar because I needed somewhere my dog and I wouldn't freeze. He paused. I found something else. He opened Cross's flight log. A reason to stay. Silence settled. Whitmore leaned back. This hearing concerns land ownership, not sentiment. Then let's discuss Black Horn, Rachel said. For the first time, Whitmore's expression changed. Walter testified next. He spoke about Benjamin Cross's 3 flights, the missing records, the complaints Cross filed against Whitmore Timber. Rachel played the recovered radio recording. Static filled the hearing room. Then Benjamin Cross spoke from 22 years earlier. Falcon Ridge 1 approaching Black Horn from southeast. Nobody moved. The dead man's voice continued. Dispatch ordered him back. Cross answered. Copy your order. Then, I'm going in. Martha lowered her head. Walter closed his eyes. The tape continued until Cross reported the secondary avalanche and the 3 missing teenagers. Rachel stopped it. Mr. Whitmore has repeatedly described Benjamin Cross as reckless. Whitmore's attorney stood. Objection to characterization. This is an administrative hearing. The chairman rubbed his forehead. Sit down. Rachel placed photographs on the display board. Heavy equipment, drilling pipe, the western slope. Whitmore Timber. These photographs were taken before and during the Black Horn rescue. Mr. Cross filed a complaint 3 days before the avalanche concerning unauthorized blasting. Whitmore finally spoke. My father's company operated across thousands of acres. Equipment being photographed near a mountain proves nothing. Rachel nodded. You're correct. Whitmore looked surprised. It does not, by itself. She turned toward the door, which is why I asked Mark Sullivan to come. A man in his early 40s stepped into the room. Daniel had never seen him. Walter had. The old mechanic rose halfway from his chair. "Mark?" The man nodded. He walked forward with a slight limp. Rachel swore him in. "Mr. Sullivan, where were you on December 14th, 22 years ago?" "Black Horn." The room became completely still. "I was 16. Whitmore stared at him. Sullivan looked toward Cross's photograph on the evidence board. "Benjamin Cross saved my life," Rachel asked him to explain. Sullivan did. Cross had landed below the shelf during a break in the storm. He loaded Sullivan and another injured teenager, flew them down, refueled, returned. "We heard the blast before the mountain moved," Rachel stopped him. "What blast?" "From the west." "How do you know?" "Because we'd heard blasting earlier that morning." Whitmore's attorney stood again. "Memory after 22 years. Sullivan turned toward him. "I gave the same statement when I was 16. Silence. Rachel asked, "To whom?" "County investigators." "What happened to it?" "I don't know." Sullivan reached inside his coat. "But my mother kept a copy." He handed Rachel a yellowed document. "My statement was 6 pages. Rachel held up the county report. "The version in the official archive is 4. Someone in the room gasped. Sullivan's voice shook. "They removed the part about the blasting. They removed the part where I said Cross came back." Whitmore's face lost color. "He came back twice, Sullivan said. "The last time the mountain came down again. He couldn't reach the other 3. His eyes filled. He nearly died trying." The room stayed silent. No applause. It was too painful for applause. 20 years of blame had just collapsed in less than 5 minutes. Rachel then connected Whitmore Timber's old blasting permits to the restricted sector. She connected Charles Whitmore's current development partnership to the proposed Falcon Ridge transfer. She presented the grain facility footage from the night before. "The fire investigation is ongoing," she said carefully. "No finding of criminal responsibility has yet been made, but state authorities are examining this vehicle and the accelerant evidence." Whitmore stood. This is outrageous." The chairman looked at him. "For once, Charles, sit down." Whitmore did. The board recessed for 37 minutes. Daniel spent them outside in the hallway. Susan remained 20 feet away. She did not come closer. Martha handed him coffee. Walter stood beside the window. "You think Benny knows?" Daniel looked at him. "Knows what?" "That people finally heard him." Daniel looked through the glass at snow-covered Silver Creek. "I don't know." Walter nodded. "Me neither." The board returned. The chairman read the decision. Falcon Ridge's abandonment proceeding was terminated. The Cross Mountain Rescue Trust was recognized as active pending routine state oversight. The county had no authority to demolish or redevelop the 587 acres. Daniel Hayes was approved as temporary operational caretaker under an independent board. The vote was unanimous. Walter covered his face. Martha cried openly. Sullivan stared at Cross's photograph. Then came something Daniel had not expected. The chairman looked beyond the legal papers. "For the public record, this board acknowledges substantial evidence that Benjamin Cross's actions during the Black Horn rescue were misrepresented in the county findings." He paused. "A corrected historical review will be issued." Walter made a sound Daniel had never heard from him. Half laugh, half sob. Benjamin Cross had been dead for years, but his name had finally come home. Whitmore left through a side door. State investigators waited outside. Nobody cheered when they approached him. Justice, Daniel realized, did not always look like victory. Sometimes it looked like a door closing quietly behind the right man. Rachel found Daniel on the courthouse steps. She handed him one final sheet. found this attached to Cross's trust amendment. Daniel unfolded it. One sentence. Cross's handwriting. Don't ask the next man whether he deserved shelter before you give it. A roof can keep a body alive long enough for purpose to find him. Daniel read it again, then again. He could not speak. Across the street, Silver Creek moved normally. A snowplow passed. A bell rang over Martha's diner door. Life had not changed for the world, only for him. Susan stood near her car. She looked toward Daniel, then, without asking anything from him, she got inside and drove away. She had come. She had stayed through the whole hearing, and when it was over, she had allowed Daniel to choose the next door. Rachel touched his shoulder. You saved Falcon Ridge, Daniel folded Cross's note. No. He thought of Maverick lying at the clinic. Somebody else did. That afternoon, Daniel returned there. Maverick lifted his head when Daniel entered. Daniel sat on the floor beside him. We won. The dog's tail moved once against the blanket. Cross is cleared. Another small movement. Whitmore's in trouble. Maverick closed his eyes. Daniel smiled. Yeah, I figured you'd care more about dinner. He rested his hand against the dog's neck. For 15 years, Daniel had measured safety by exits. How quickly could he leave? Where was the nearest door? Who could block it? Falcon Ridge had survived. The trust had survived. Cross's name had society. Maverick had survived. Daniel should have felt safe. Instead, one question frightened him more than any of the others. What happened when a man who had spent half his life preparing to leave finally found a place that wanted him to stay? Daniel did not answer it that winter. He worked instead. By early March, the Bitterroots had begun releasing their grip on Silver Creek. Snow still covered the high ridges, but the wheat fields below Falcon Ridge showed dark earth in widening patches. Water ran beneath the ice in the irrigation canal. The days stretched longer, and Hangar 3 stood again, not as it had been, better. The burned eastern section had been rebuilt with new steel. The roof no longer leaked. The big doors rolled open on repaired tracks, revealing one bay for emergency aircraft and another for snowmobiles, rescue gear, and K-9 training equipment. Benjamin Cross's red rescue airplane sat beneath clean lights while Walter rebuilt it one patient piece at a time. The underground operations room remained almost unchanged. Daniel insisted on that. The old radios stayed, the mountain maps stayed, the names stayed on the wall. Benjamin Cross and Shadow's photograph hung exactly where Maverick had first found it. Only a small brass plaque had been added. Falcon Ridge, Volunteer Air Rescue. They went when others could not. Maverick walked with a slight limp now. The burned paw healed with a pale scar across one pad, and his shoulder stiffened on cold mornings. Daniel noticed every step. Maverick pretended not to. You're 8, Daniel told him one morning. You don't have to prove anything. Maverick picked up a training tug and dropped it at his feet. Walter laughed from beneath the airplane. Dog thinks you're talking about yourself. Daniel looked at him. Nobody asked you. That's never stopped me. Some things had changed more quietly. Daniel began driving into Missoula every Thursday. At first, he told Walter he had appointments. Walter never asked what kind. Eventually, Daniel stopped hiding it. The veterans clinician was named Dr. Karen Mitchell. The first session lasted 48 minutes. Daniel spent 30 of them discussing Maverick. The second time, he talked about Aaron Cole. The third time, he admitted he still checked every door twice before sleeping. Dr. Mitchell did not tell him to stop. She asked what he believed would happen if he didn't. That question followed him all the way back to Falcon Ridge. Healing, Daniel discovered, was not a straight road. Some nights he slept 4 hours, some nights 20 minutes. A dropped wrench could still send his heart racing. He still sat facing diner entrances. He still woke reaching for something that was not there. But now, sometimes, he noticed before Maverick had to tell him. Sometimes he breathed. Sometimes he called someone. That was new. Susan came on Sundays. Not every Sunday. Enough of them. She never arrived unannounced anymore. Never asked whether Daniel had forgiven her. She brought groceries once. He told her she didn't have to. The next week she brought paintbrushes instead. They spent 3 hours painting the office wall without discussing Gregory, the locks, or 15 lost years. When she left, Daniel walked her to the door. It was not forgiveness, but it was a door. And it was open. Rachel became chair of the Independent Trust Board. Walter became maintenance director, though he insisted his official title should be man preventing fools from touching airplanes. Martha organized volunteers without accepting any title at all. The trust money repaired buildings, insured equipment, funded training, and converted 2 small rooms along the west wall into temporary housing. Daniel kept the smallest room. People suggested he rent a house in town. He declined, not because he was afraid to leave Falcon Ridge, because he no longer needed to. The first real rescue call came before the spring thaw. A rancher disappeared after his snowmobile broke down near a Forest Service road west of Silver Creek. Daniel and Maverick went out with county search teams. They found the man after midnight beneath a fallen pine. Hypothermic, but alive. Maverick located him first. Daniel stayed with him until the helicopter arrived. Afterward, the rancher's wife tried to press money into Daniel's hand. Daniel remembered Benjamin Cross. He closed her fingers around the bills. Put it toward somebody else's bad night. Driving home, he looked at Maverick. That sounded better in my head. Maverick slept. Falcon Ridge's first veteran arrived in April, then another. Neither stayed long. That was the point. A bed, a meal, help with paperwork, a ride to an appointment, work if they wanted it, silence if they didn't. No speeches about gratitude. No one had to perform suffering correctly to deserve shelter. Then, on a freezing evening near the end of April, Maverick disappeared. Daniel had been closing the west bay when he realized the dog was gone. Maverick. Nothing. His pulse jumped. Then he saw tracks. They crossed the wet runway toward the abandoned grain elevator across the highway. Daniel followed. The old structure stood black against the evening sky. Maverick was behind it, sitting beside a boy, 19 maybe, thin jacket, dirty backpack, hands shoved beneath his arms against the cold. When Daniel approached, the kid stood quickly. I wasn't stealing anything. Daniel stopped. I didn't say you were. I'll go. Didn't say that either. The boy looked at Maverick. Your dog wouldn't leave. Daniel almost laughed. Yeah, he does that. The boy's name was Tyler Grant. His mother's boyfriend had thrown him out 3 nights earlier after an argument. He had been sleeping behind the grain elevator because the bus station had cameras, and he was afraid somebody would make him go back. Daniel looked at the backpack on bag. 19 years old, cold, waiting for the next locked door. For a moment, Daniel saw a gravel driveway. Gregory Nolan behind glass. Susan holding a white mug, $67. He could almost hear the new deadbolt turning. Tyler shifted. I said I'll leave. Daniel looked at him. You know how to use a broom? The kid frowned. What? A broom, yeah. Good. Daniel turned toward Falcon Ridge. Food first. Work tomorrow. Tyler did not move. What's the catch? No catch. Everybody's got one. Daniel understood that sentence too well. He did not argue with it. Then keep looking for it. Tyler stared at him. Daniel continued walking. After a few steps, he heard boots behind him. At the side door of the rebuilt hangar, Tyler stopped again. Warm light spilled across the concrete. Maverick walked inside, then turned around. The dog waited. Tyler looked at Daniel. Daniel held the door. The boy hesitated at the threshold. And Daniel saw himself. Not the SEAL, not the veteran, not the man from Blackhorn hearings and burning hangars. The 19-year-old boy who had once stood outside a house waiting for somebody to choose him over their fear. "Nobody decides your whole life tonight," Daniel said. Tyler looked inside. "Just like that?" "No." Daniel shook his head. "Nothing's just like that." He nodded toward the kitchen. "But there's soup." Tyler stepped through. Maverick followed him. Daniel remained at the doorway for 1 second longer. Then he went inside too. Weeks passed. Tyler swept floors, then organized rescue gear. Walter taught him the difference between an adjustable wrench and what Walter called the correct wrench. Martha fed him until his face stopped looking hollow. He did not trust any of them. Not completely. Daniel never asked him to. Trust built differently when somebody had spent years expecting the catch. Sometimes the most important thing was simply letting enough ordinary days pass without one. One evening, Tyler asked Daniel why he was doing it. "You don't even know me." Daniel handed him a box of replacement bolts. "Benjamin Cross didn't know me." "Who's that?" Daniel pointed toward the underground stairs. "Come on." He showed Tyler the photographs, the maps, Shadow, the flight logs, then Cross's note. "A roof can keep a body alive long enough for purpose to find him." Tyler read it twice. "So he left all this to you?" Daniel looked around the room. He left it to whoever came next. Tyler looked confused. Daniel smiled. "Took me a while too." That night, after Walter went home and Tyler fell asleep in one of the west rooms, Daniel sat beside the open hangar door. Maverick rested against his boot. Spring runoff whispered through the irrigation canal. The mountains were dark shapes beneath a sky crowded with stars. Daniel touched the old field watch on his wrist. His father's watch. The one thing he had carried out of that locked house. For years, he had believed survival meant needing nothing nobody could take away. He had been wrong. Benjamin Cross had never rescued Daniel from a battlefield, never knew his name, never knew a homeless former SEAL and an aging Malinois would one day find his hidden room. Cross had simply built a place where the next broken person would not have to prove his worth before being allowed inside. Daniel looked down. Maverick opened one eye. "You didn't find treasure under this place, did you?" The dog's tail tapped once. "No." Daniel looked across Falcon Ridge. "You found where I was supposed to stop running." Above the side door hung a hand-painted sign, Falcon Ridge Rescue, and beneath it, "No one left outside." Daniel stood. He switched off the hangar's work lights. Darkness settled across the aircraft, across Cross's photographs, across the tools waiting for morning. One light remained, the warm lamp above the side door. Daniel reached toward the switch, then stopped. He remembered another door. New brass, cold glass, a mother who had been too afraid to open it. He lowered his hand. The light stayed on. Maverick looked up at him. Daniel smiled. "Leave it." For once, the dog obeyed. Daniel closed neither the light nor the meaning behind it, because somewhere beyond Falcon Ridge, on a snowy road, in a failing truck, behind a bus station, beneath a bridge, or simply inside a life that had become too heavy, somebody else might still believe every door in the world had been locked against them. And if that person ever found the cracked runway leading toward Falcon Ridge, Daniel wanted them to see one warm light in the darkness, not because Daniel Hayes was afraid of the dark anymore, but because somebody else might still be trying to find the way home. If you believe nobody who has served, struggled, or simply fallen on hard times should be left outside, type "Leave the light on" in the comments. And if stories about loyalty, second chances, and ordinary Americans standing for what matters mean something to you, subscribe and stay with us for the next one.